We've already taken our seats. We can get started. Mr. Harris, will you call the roll, please? Here.
Present.
Here.
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 Here. Do we have a quorum? Do have a quorum. We are now, Government Study Commission is now in session. First order of business are minutes from the July 15th meeting. You all received a copy of them at the beginning of the week. Are there any, is there a motion to accept the minutes?
I'm sorry, I'm still logging in.
I'll make that.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
And there's a second, Mr. Barr. And are there any changes, corrections?
Yes, I have one,
Yes.
but I didn't get the printed one, so if I can get to the one that was emailed quickly, I will give that to you. I apologize. Thank you.
Can you give her the microphone?
The microphone's right here, sir. Turn this one on as well.
There we go.
There's Eileen. Yes, in the new business, Commissioner Cook noted that the commission has reviewed and drafted 13 articles for the proposed charter. She emphasized the work of the commission has extended far beyond the city's fiscal matters. My point in that was not necessarily that it extended far beyond the city's fiscal matters, which is one fact. The other fact, and the point that I wanted to make, is that we've been talking about all of these articles, and it was to the point that was brought up that the city council and districts had just been brought up all of a sudden. But my point was to say that we talked about that very early on before we even began any drafting of a charter.
Okay, do you have, how you'd like to
How I'd
phrase
like to
that?
say that? Oh, okay. She emphasized work has extended far beyond the fiscal matters. And so we can add to that. And commissioners have discussed city council and districts months before we started drafting.
Okay, are there any other changes or corrections to be made to the minutes? Is there any objection to the minutes as corrected?
No.
Hearing none, the minutes are approved as corrected. Did you get that one change? Okay, thank you. Next item, business report from the chair. I've just one item to mention. The information sessions started on Monday, and the second one was Wednesday.
Yesterday.
That was Wednesday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Life has become quite the blur lately. And while I'm disappointed in myself that I've been unable to attend, my understanding is they've been very successful. I want to thank Commissioner Rufo for organizing these, and Commissioner McGran, and the entire Public Engagement Committee, but thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the feedback and hearing the responses. But so far, I find it a very positive step forward in the process. There is one more on next week, is it?
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. Okay, thank you.
And public hearing,
Well, we're going to discuss the public hearing under other business, but just to put it out there, the public hearing will be is scheduled for next Thursday at 7 p.m. in City Council chambers. Okay, public comments. If any member of the public would like to speak, thank you for being here. please come up to the lectern. If you make sure that the little green light is on, provide us with your name and the street on which you live, and if you would please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
All right, I'm gonna start my own timer today, so you don't interrupt me. My name is Vicki Wright Smith. I'm from the 100 block of South Marshall Street. And I really just came today because I was here the last time, and I expressed my concerns that while I know this is a historical moment for the city, and I know the city is in dire straits financially, I get all that. But home rule, as I said back then, should not just be about bailing the city out. I think we have an obligation to the residents of this city. And one of the things that I brought up then, and I continue to bring up, is the fact that I do not believe that all wards and residents of this city are adequately represented on the city council. So I really don't understand, and no one has presented a good argument to me why each ward in this city should not have their own city council person. Now, I want to take a moment to commend Commissioner Cook, Commissioner Byrd, and Commissioner Dastra for your efforts in looking into trying to make sure that all the residents had adequate representation. And when history looks back on this moment, I have no doubt that they will be kind to you. So that being said, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time because I didn't even get to participate fully last time because I had my grandson and I have him again today. So I just hope that you will take that into consideration as you are completing the Home Rule Study Commission Charter. Like I said, I understand the city's financial needs. I know the ARPA money is running out, but there's a bigger issue here. There's a bigger issue, and that is to make sure that every resident feels like they have a say-so in what goes on in this city. And they don't right now. If we're being honest, they just don't. You can look at the last election. You saw how they treated Tanae Darby. Come on. The least you can do is take into consideration the recommendation that Commissioners Cook, Dastra, and Byrd are making. And that's all I have to say. Thank you all for your work that you're doing, but you got more work to do, and you need to do it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other public comments?
Reverend Bailey, pastor of Bethel African Methodist Church, the oldest black church in the city of Lancaster, over 207 years of age. I'm really concerned, and I think you folk are wrestling with that, about the representation from the quadrants of the city. Too many people get elected to the city council and speak nothing for that part of the city where I pastor. And I think if you can break it up into quadrants, I think that's what I heard it was going to be, and have the 9 council, maybe 5 at large, or 4, however you want at large, and 2 for each quadrant. I think it would be a fair situation. I think the thing that bothers me is that, you know, people talk democracy, but they don't live it. They want a few people to make decisions for everybody. And that's the problem that we're having. Most of us are thinkers. Many of us read. Some of us have a little bit of education and can be trusted to make choices. But there's a belief in America that's coming around. It's been around for a while with the Electoral College, that there's certain people who should not be making decisions about the governance of their country, their county, and the city. And I would pray that you folk would think a little different. And even if it's uncomfortable with you, even if you don't feel comfortable that somebody has a different idea than you, thinks different than you, don't have the money that you have, I would hope that you would consider allowing that voice to be heard. So I'm just plugging, I don't know whether it's 3 minutes, but I'm plugging for the representation from different parts of the city. I like the idea. And finally, you know, I hate that I always have to come down and talk for my part of the city. That in order to get something, I got to come down and talk. We ought to have representation on the council, on the board, who's talking about the clear things that are needed in that part of the city as well as other parts of the city. And so I pray that you would think about that, because I'm getting old now, unlike some of you. And I'm really concerned about the legacy that my generation leaves, because we thought when we were younger we were going to do differently and be better. And I'm finding out that we got older. Some of us are just like the foreparents who didn't think other people should have a say in how we govern our city. So that's what I have to say, and hope that you folk will take the time to think it over. And my God, if you pray about it, you'll get a good answer.
Thank you, Reverend Bailey. Any other public comments?
Good evening, Commissioners. Tanae Darby from the 300 block of South Marshall Street. Just overall, I am not for additional taxation of the residents of Lancaster City. So I just want that to be said. And also, I have a request from Lisa Colon, who lives on, I'm sorry, she gave me this information, the 400 block of North Prince Street. She is the Lancaster County Controller. She wanted me to say, which is the person who oversees the money in the county. And she also wanted for me to express for her that she is also not for the home rule site. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Okay, seeing nobody rising, there is another item at the end of the meeting where if you have comments to make at the end, you may do so. And thank you. Next order of business are our deliberations on the form of government. On the charter language, we have 3 articles still left to discuss: City Council, Budget and Finance, and the Ethics Commission, Article 2, 8, and 12. If they're without objection, I'd like to move to a committee of the whole with the purpose of deliberating on the 2 items left on the City Council article, which is the section on council, form of council, and on compensation. And then moving on to Article 8 on Budget and Finance and Ethics. Is there any objection?
Yeah, I do have an objection to that. I think we shouldn't restrict it to any specific items, just discuss the whole article.
Okay, there is an objection. I would then ask for a show of hands that we can move on to, how would I put this? So move to a committee of the whole with the purposes of those 2 items on City Council. All those in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
It's a confusing thing, because like, it sounds like we're voting for or against discussing anything. We're just voting for or against discussing the entire article versus 2 specific sections.
Yes. City Council is the choice. What I propose is that we'll be discussing section 202 on composition and do we have this, and section 213 on compensation. If I have the right form in front of me. It is tied at 3 apiece. Therefore, that fails. Now the question goes, how do we proceed?
Yeah, I don't think,
I don't think
the
we
reason I made clarification is because it was apparent that there was a lack of understanding of what we were voting on. And I'm pretty sure we're not allowed to just abstain without an understanding, like,
Yeah, and I'm apologizing. There's something wrong with my OneDrive and I cannot access my files, so I have not actually been paying attention to what just happened.
Okay,
So I will stop doing what
So
I'm
there
doing
was-
and
there was
pay
an-
attention.
all right, let's try again. I had asked for any objections to limiting Article 2. We have discussed all the sections of Article 2 back in March, February and March, and had not come to a consensus on 202 and 213, and that was left for the future. So I would like to limit discussion to that. We have a lot to do, so we can get through budget and finance. Mr. Datra objected. So the question is there a show of hands for moving to a committee of the whole, as there is an objection? It's not unanimous consent on moving forward with discussions on Article 2, 8, and 12, with Article 2 being based on composition of city council and compensation. Is there a show of hands? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, so it is 4-4, so the decision comes down to the chair to break the tie. I vote with the limiting to those two sections, so that we are in a committee of the whole. I would like to give the chair to the representatives from PEL to act as the moderators for those.
Very good. Thank you very much, Chairman Adams. Again, based on the show of hands, we're going to discuss initially Article 2, Section 202. And what you see up on the screen is the version from May 23rd that provided for a council that is composed of 7 members elected at large by the voters of the city.
I can't see, I got bad eyes.
Okay. So I would open the floor for discussion on form of council.
I have a question. I thought the latest draft was as of July 8th.
she'd like to see the work of the subcommittee is what she's saying.
Well, we have the subcommittee as a PDF, and that's available.
Yeah.
That's
They're
here,
just-
but that was also presented as a PDF, so that's part of the discussion, because I think the work of the subcommittee touched on a number of council people and method of election.
Well, you're saying, it's just, you're using a Word document is what you're saying.
Yeah, but we
Yeah.
have.
No, I
we have
understand.
the subcommittee report.
Yeah, I got
And
you.
it depends on how you want to proceed, but we can show either or.
This is the,
I do have the other, the subcommittee
This is the
report as well.
I think it's fair to use that version because that is the conversation of the subcommittee that we were proposing to the commission as a whole.
that makes sense to me.
Okay. That's fine. We'll work off of the subcommittee language for composition of council. Again, I would open the floor for discussion on composition of council.
I'll start. Back in May, I expressed my, conflict about moving to districts from at-large. My concern comes from not knowing if that's going to solve the problem that we know many people feel they're not being heard from their government. We know that across the board, local, state, federal elections. Most people, many of us, don't feel like our government either represents us or is listening to us. And so throughout the process, I have thought, what can the charter do to help council listen to the needs of community? And from there are two articles that I think provide a lot more power to self-governance for residents and our citizens. And so for me, in home rule, we've increased self-governance compared to what is happening now through the ability to allow citizens to ask their government to consider, review, or change laws. Additionally, citizens can ask for an agenda item or to call a special meeting and force council to have a conversation that perhaps they're ignoring. We've seen examples when citizens come to council and put pressure. Recently, they have made decisions that I think they probably wouldn't have made otherwise. The other thing that I think is really powerful is the budget changes where we've increased insight into the process, review and feedback. I mean, the budget is a value statement. It tells you what your elected officials think is important to you as residents. And so I have come to the conclusion that those two things are incredibly powerful, and it helps create conditions for all of us to understand the responsibility we have to self-governance. And so I am, as I know that some of you will be very disappointed to hear this, but I think that we should stay at large. I do have other things that were, I am in support of other things that were in this article. I'm okay with the quorum, including members who are present, as long as they're visible on camera. I think that makes sense. I'm open to term limits as outlined in the what the committee is suggesting, where they have a certain number of terms and then they have to take a break where they can run it before they can run again. I'd be happy with that. Let's see, what's the other one?
Video records?
Yeah, I'm on the fence about that one. I am also open to creating a trigger based on population that mandates reconsideration of the size of council. And I'm also open to adding a requirement that every 10 years, council has to consider switching how they're elected, and that they have to hold a series of public meetings and get significant feedback. I mean, if I was on council, what I would be doing right now, I would be going out and getting grant money to hold a deliberative forum to actually find out what the people of our community, once they understand the pros and cons of the two different processes, what people of our community want. And if I was on council, I would make sure that was complete before November election. But I'm not on council, so I can't do that. So those are my comments on the work that you guys have done, and I really do appreciate everything you've done. I just think there's, for me personally, I think there's a lot of unknowns and I don't have enough answers. So unless something comes out of the information sessions or the public hearings, right now I'm for staying at large.
Well, I will say I just appreciate your openness to so many other aspects of the work we've done. I'm actually going to send you a Word copy because that might be easier for, and I apologize for it being a PDF. But this is part of why, I think we should be having a large discussion about the whole article, because some of these items that Ms. Rufo's brought up are not exclusive to the composition or compensation sections. So I appreciate your thoughtfulness throughout this entire process, and I definitely understand the unknown aspect of this, because a lot of what we're doing is looking through the crystal ball.
Yeah.
And I understand that you're thinking about this in earnest.
Thanks, Tony.
I just want to say I'm not surprised. I mean, I think when we started talking about the home rule and started talking about city council, there were some of us that had a lot of questions and didn't really know a whole lot about districting. And we requested to get information. We requested to have someone look into us and give us some factual information. As a whole, the commissioners denied moving that forward. So the intention was known in the very beginning. I think that we are overseeing. I mean, I think when I listen to the comments from the commissioners, well, we might not find somebody who's qualified enough. Well, to be qualified, according to the charter and what we're saying, to be qualified to run for city council, a resident has to reside continuously in the city for 2 years prior to the date of the general election to be eligible to run for the office. But yet we sit here and we hear comments over and over again that if we divide into districts, we're not going to find qualified representation. Now, if these commissioners would have said, let's change the qualifications. But to say the only thing, you have to live here for 2 years, and then to tell us the reason you don't want to go to districting is because it's going to limit who's qualified to run, and the only qualification is you got to live in the city for 2 years? I mean, I think that's a hard look, and I think people really need to look in themselves that made those comments, because that's the very thing that we sit here and fight for. When we have people say you're not going to find qualified people if we divide into 4 different districts, that's the very thing that we sit at the table, people come up and talk about because those type of comments are made, and it's not realistic. When we look at the charters, Easton went to districting. And it's more than just voices being heard. That is one reason. There are other reasons why we should go to districting. One thing, it raises the stakes, and it helps us hold our politicians that we elect accountable. Now, once again, this commission had the chance to say, well, that council would only serve 2 terms. But no, we want them to serve 4 terms, but you want us to say, we're going to set a standard of accountability, but we're going to let them serve 4 terms. Even if they would serve 2 terms, then the other comment that we heard a lot at the deliberations is, well, if you don't like it, vote them out. But we got to wait 4 years to vote them out. And if it was 2 years, and if there was a population in the city that felt they were unrepresented, and they could show that through the vote, that would make sense. But we're not fighting for that. The other reason is the district's move would be important because it gives residents more buy-in. We're trying to sell this home rule. And I mean, the very changes that we would make that would cause people to want to buy in, we keep saying no. We say, oh, let's put a cap on how much the administration could spend. No, let's not put a ceiling on there. We said things about the ethic code. Said, let's put things in the ethic code. Everyone's, no, guess what? Let's let council and the administration write the ethic code. Again, when we're asking for districting so that people could have their voices in and just writing the ethic code. You don't want to put it in the charter to hold police or address the issues that we have with police in the ethic code. We don't want to put that in there. The other thing is when we talk about the area, we talk about the administration, and we talk about putting everything. There were good ideas that came through a lot of the subcommittees and the commissioners as addressing things that the administration could do to even make people feel that their voices are heard or have representation or hold politicians accountable. And we said, no, let's let the mayor and city council write the administrative code. We're just saying, you got to do it. And you got to do it in 18 months. Well, now we know the mayor isn't even going to be here then. The next year. So how long is that going to take before we actually have some action and some teeth in a charter that we're sitting here and trying to sell to the people? I mean, I really think that the commissioners got to take a hard look and say, what are we trying to do? We heard a lot of comments from the public that came up and said, this is all about finance. Never has the home rule study been just about finances. That was the initiative for maybe the mayor recommending it. But when I sat down and I got the blue book that said what the home rule study was about, never did it say just taxes. This was our opportunity to make a change, and make a change that would be beneficial for everybody, not the seniors, the elderly, the people that are on fixed incomes. I mean, we're saying, oh, guess what? We're going to get to look at the budget 2 months early. And we're supposed to be happy about that. That is one thing, and it's a good thing. But that's not all that we have or all that we could do to make it a better thing. We are compromising at what we're trying to do, what we're trying to create. We're rushing. We have people to call up and say, hey, I need you to vote no on this. Don't vote yes on districting, vote no. I mean, let's be real. We're sitting here to represent the people and to offer something in the commission, in this charter that's going to help us all, whether it's finances, whether it's representation, whether it's about holding the politicians accountable. And we have that opportunity to do that. And everything that we have done, I know on all the subcommittees I've been on, the remarks that I made sitting here as a commissioner, it was like added to the administrative code. Well, who writes the administrative code? Council and the mayor. So it's their say. So why not have those people that are going to write the administrative code at least be representing districts in the city, so we know there are things that are going to show up in the ethic code and show up in the administrative code that is going to address not just some of the population, but all the population by having district representation. Some has put emphasis on redistricting, has not changed much, or we're so afraid that the redistricting that's going to happen. Let's face it, the city has not been doing a lot of redistricting. We had a lot of precinct changes maybe 5 years ago that moved one block to another block. The city is almost built where it can go. It's not like we're going to grow our population. Our population hasn't grown in 50 years. 50 years. Well, that's how old we say that the optional charter, we've have had that same optional charter operating for 50 years. So when we talk about, oh, we're scared of redistricting, I think the subcommittee came up with ways and language that would address, even when we redistrict, to keep it fair. So that's not a reason to say, oh, well, we shouldn't do it. Redistricting is not really going to happen and affect Lancaster City. The only way we're going to grow is if we grow up. There's not much land to build on, or maybe no one has really looked around, but most of the land's taken. So if we grow in population, it's because we're building up. And I think that it's not going to change to the much that we're going to worry about the gerrymandering that we see at the national and at the state levels. You know, we're talking about 60,000 people here in the city. So it's not going to change to that. So I'm not really surprised, because this is what the commission has put forth from the beginning. I mean, I'm disappointed because I thought the commission was serious. And when we started talking about council very early on, city council and the composition, we had plenty of opportunity to get answers and to dig into and to find out what the do's and don'ts were, and we refused to go there. Then when we get down to a month away and it's time to write the charter, we're like, well, let's form a subcommittee, knowing that the decision was already made, that most of the people sitting on the commission was not going to support districting. So they said, well, you know what, it's okay. Let them go ahead and have the subcommittee. That's the very thing that we fight. That's the very reason why I sit at the table, because of that mentality level. And it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. If you really want to look into districting, then look into districting. But don't make up these things. Oh, wow, representation, you're only going to represent the east side, or you're only going to represent those people. We all know that's not what districting is about. It's about accountability. It's about holding politicians accountable. It's not about, oh, only you're going to get represented and not us, and that council member is not going to say nothing that's going to help me. He's still going to vote on whether your taxes get raised or they don't get raised. So he is going to represent you. So I think that, you know, all the excuses we've heard, I don't think you really looked into what it is and what districting could do. And I did look into it. Amy, I read the articles that you gave us to read about districting. I didn't find anything in there that would turn me off and say, oh, you don't want to go there. I did not see that. I think we're sitting here in front of a lot of people that are scared about change, people that have their minds made up of where they want to see the city at in a few years from now. But, I mean, that's what this whole charter writing is. We got to step out there. We can't be afraid of change. And districting, and the one thing I keep hearing Commissioner Bryan say is that well, we could put it on the referendum later. Well, why not put it now and try it? And if it don't work, then put it on the referendum to take it away. What's wrong with that idea? I mean, why don't we try something new? We put all this time, all this energy, and all this effort into writing this charter. And like I said, when it came to the meat of the charter, we really didn't put it in the charter. We left it for the counselor and administrative to write it and to decide. And so I just think that we need to look. I'm still pushing for districting, and I hope that, some people change their mind and stop being afraid of districting and what it may do, because that's, a lot of that is not true. Thank you.
Very well said, Commissioner Byrd.
Yes.
Very well said. And I'd like to add to that as being part of the subcommittee. I'd like to add to that as being part of the subcommittee. I could not gather all of that of what you said. So Commissioner Byrd, I appreciate all of that because you have a lot more knowledge about what the city has been doing. I pay attention in the background, but you're engaged. The only other thing I think I want to say about districts is I haven't heard a reason as to, there's folks that need representation and say they need representation. So the others that have the representation don't see the need for the people who don't have representation. So it's just, they don't see the need. And the people who are begging for the representation, they still don't get it. Because there's an idea that, I don't know that I want to say it because I'm not saying it correctly, but there's no reason, I don't know why there's pushback about dividing the city up into quadrants, and Commissioner Dastra used a tool, an online tool, a reputable tool that came really close to dividing the four quadrants and having the population to be within the variance of the 10% or whatever it is. So I'm still, because I am, like I said before, lived in every quadrant of the city, but for the past 40 plus years, I lived in the Southeast, and I know the difference. And I know that there's not someone sitting on the city council that speaks to our community. I know that. And I think it's important that we have that voice because obviously no one else seems to think that that voice is needed, but it is. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about that. So yes, I'm also disappointed, and I also got the feeling, honestly, I got the feeling that there's some other agenda underneath, but I don't go to figuring those things out. Then I'm looking back at how far back we've been talking about districting and how it was kind of put off that we would get to that. And here we are forming a subcommittee, meeting like twice, 3 times in a week just to get set up somewhere and have these meetings for the people to come. And I'm disappointed that there's pushback about people having representation. I'm disappointed in that.
I think I appreciate all the work that you guys did on the committee, definitely, and I appreciate everybody's. I've talked to Brian and many of you. I've talked to you about this, and appreciate all of your viewpoints. But I think for me, I feel that in talking to everybody that I've talked to, I feel that the overarching theme is we feel, in other words, citizens coming to me have said we don't feel that we are accurately well represented in our quadrant or in our precinct. So I keep hearing that. And I would have to say, I don't see any compelling reason why we shouldn't, other than fear, why we wouldn't try something new. I don't feel that, I think it would be something worth trying. I feel like it's an equitable idea. I feel it's good information that you put out, that even other areas have tried this. It's not like we're trying something totally foreign. It has been tried by other areas. So I feel that Lancaster if anything, is the driving force behind not doing it is, I feel, is just fear, because I just think it's time that we should try something different. I've seen over the years that city council has just continued to be comprised of just, individuals from the same areas. So I don't see equitability within, for the citizens. I don't see that. And I think this is a great way to change that. And so I do support it.
And may I say, no disrespect to the city council in any way whatsoever, just that when there's issues of the Southeast, they're not being heard. And that's my opinion. And when we were out in the community, that's what we heard. People were in favor of trying that, just so they can have representation.
Does anyone else want to speak before I have a second go at it? All right. I think the first thing I want to speak on is actually Ms. Bird's point about buy-in, because it's clear that, we're writing a charter here that is going to give the city a lot more flexibility, but to Ms. Bird's point, there's also concerns about, this charter gets written and there's work that still needs to be done. And part of why the idea of having a districted city council makes sense to me is because there is already a distrust for government. And so we're essentially creating a dynamic where people go, okay, so the government structure stays the same, but they get more power. And they have to assess for themselves whether or not that's a system they can agree with. So I think creating districts helps to give more confidence in the work that comes out of this. This body right here is way more representative of the city than, frankly, the city council is. I had the opportunity to speak to Stephen Medvick. So here's actually some counterpoint against districts coming from me. Spoke to Stephen Medvick, who works at FNN. He's written about issues like gerrymandering, very intelligent man. And in our conversations, what he essentially told me, he wasn't knocking districts out as like something that has viability, but he was saying that it's a Band-Aid for a problem that's caused within the organization of the Democratic Party. And when I say organization, I don't mean the structure that is the Democratic Party. I mean organizing, like people on the ground. And when you look at the data, that's also apparent. In the 2023 municipal election, we saw one quadrant, one district, if you will, blow the election out of the water. I know, like, if I had applied a district scenario to our election, you, Carl, Brian, Maxine, Amy, and Darlene were in the top for every area of the city. Myself and Liz lost in the northwest areas. John and Peter, you guys only had top chart numbers in that area. And I think that is demonstrative of, yes, there is a matter of representation that does fall back on people and turning out. But I think those numbers also show us there is an issue that we should look at addressing. And I believe I said this very early on. I understand districting isn't a silver bullet, but trying to make compromises to a structure of government that can maybe apply a Band-Aid, but still also give the ability to remove that Band-Aid once the wound is healed, is something that this charter has the ability to do, and something that I believe districts can do for us. I'm glad that we put in a lot of work through this subcommittee. In fact, what I'll say about, I'll speak more about our subcommittee. Even though I'm not sure how our conversations are going to go tonight, and I would like us to get into the details of the draft. Hopefully Lynn got the Word document I emailed off to her, but our subcommittee was way more of a workshop than anything I've seen us do as a commission so far. Like, we were having constant back and forth with members of the public. A gentleman in the Southwest meeting actually gave input, and on the spot we were like, oh yeah, okay, and we all agreed and we worked it in and we moved forward. And that's the one thing that constantly gives me a level of, I don't know what the proper, I'll say dissociation, because like me as a member of this body, seeing all these people here, it's like, I want to talk to you about what's going on. But
could you
as far
address your comments to the commission, please?
And that goes to my point, because I'm not addressing my comment to anybody in particular. I'm addressing my comment as a matter of action to demonstrate a point. So yeah, this is a really weird thing, and I feel like this matter of districts has been held up by procedural norms that aren't actually norms. They're just standards that we almost arbitrarily throw out when something makes us uncomfortable. So we do need to work through this document. We need to evaluate what changes are possible, what are amenable to a majority of the commission. But I do thank Commissioner Cook and Commissioner Byrd for being on the subcommittee with me. And I think that in terms of buy-in, it's going to be a very interesting election because I do not see how the value proposition works out for the people who statistically turn out. In the same way, it's kind of like Ms. Byrd said, there's a notion of like, just let them do it, it's going to fail anyway. What if that's what's happening right now to all 9 of us here? Oh yeah, it's just a study. What's it hurt us? Then we actually get to the ballot box and we find out like, oh yeah, it was just a study. We did a lot of work studying something and it doesn't really matter because we're worried about who's going to turn out and who we're actually trying to get the buy-in of. And it is a regionalized bias.
Are there additional comments, or do we have a consensus
A consensus on what?
on whether to retain council shall be composed of 7 members elected at large by the voters of the city? I would argue we have a consensus.
I make a motion that we speak on a consensus for having districts within the city.
I second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any debate?
Just, is that different than what we just did?
We just said have districts. We haven't said what that's
Elected by districts, something about districts.
elected
Yes.
by districts.
Is there any debate? Call the question. All those in favor of changing it to by district, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Again, it's a 4-4 tie. Chair breaks the tie. I vote no. So that provides our consensus. Council shall be composed of 7 members elected at large by the voters of the city. So,
I mean, I think that it says that we're not going districting. I think I'm going to make a motion that council be 9 members.
okay, there is a motion that we change the 7 members to 9 members. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a
What
second.
do we do to discuss that?
Yeah, is it-
Deliberations, anybody have any, would like to discuss
Can
it?
you explain why you think that would be helpful?
Would you like me to explain that?
Sure.
Because right now we're sitting here with 9 people. So if we're not going to go by districting, at least enlarge council to get more representation to sit on council.
More opportunity.
And yep,
Right, exactly.
I'm comfortable with that.
Me too.
Any other comments?
I'd just like to say that were you to go to, thank you. Were you to go to a 9-member council, one counselor needs to get more members to join their position to get a majority. I'm not sure that is beneficial ultimately to the power of the council as an independent body within the city. I would assume that people would want the council to have power that is comparable to the mayor and what they do, and the way in which they exercise it is to have a majority. If you make the number larger, it's harder to do that. That's why I would not support this.
I would ask how many votes have come down to council to actually be a 1-vote swing.
5-4.
That there hasn't been a real issue as far as that right now, adding 2 members, even if they're completely different perspective. I can think of maybe, I don't remember the subject, I think it was related to civil service, that might have been a moment where there was a near split on it. But I agree with Darlene, like expanding the council gives the opportunity for better representation just because you're giving 2 additional people in the city every 4 years the opportunity to be a representative of the public. And also from another standpoint, I think having more representatives to people, a better ratio is what I'm trying to say, also makes sense because now instead of 7 bites of the apple, like you said earlier in meetings, you have 9 bites of the apple.
No doubt this is true. I just think that we're in the process of building a system to last beyond whatever disputes have come before the council now, and we'll have to stand into the future. And I guess I'm the person here arguing for the power of council as a separately elected body of the city, and believe that their ability to form a majority is an important way for them to exercise that power. I wouldn't want to see that eroded.
I don't think their power gets diminished at all. Mr. Chair, could we call the question?
The question's been called. All those in favor of moving to nine members, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. So the council shall be composed of 9 members. I will take that as our discussion on Section 202 is complete. So if we can move on to Section 213 about compensation.
We probably need to assess the rest of the article unless those numbers.
All right, if we would
impact anything else.
go to Section 2, Article 2, Section 213, compensation, I'm sorry. The matter was discussed before. I believe, as I recall, there was consensus on the payment that would be authorized for council. However, there was the open issue dealt with benefits that would be provided to a member of council. And so I would open the floor for discussion on the benefits section.
So I'd like to make a motion or propose some wording for this around the possible payment as well as opportunity for benefits around the language with the city council by ordinance, which is what we have, will establish compensation, reimbursements, and benefits, and that any of those and it's not prescriptive on any of those, so that we're, part of the effort that we're trying to make is to make this last as long as possible. We're in a position now where we're talking about benefits because benefits were put in previously during the administration when something like health insurance was very affordable, it was very cheap, and adding benefits wasn't a problem. Now that's changed, the dynamics of that have changed significantly. And so rather than, we've been talking all along in this whole measure, trying to have something that's going to keep a test of time. And if we have an annual salary of $8,000, that's kind of frozen in time right now. We don't even know what that's going to mean 5 years from now, 20 years from now. So if we keep it broader, that allows city council to establish their compensation, benefits as an open thing, that they can do that, and that any changes will not take place until after the start of the council session in January following the municipal election. So they can't vote for their own compensation, they can't vote for their own benefits. It's only going to take place after the next municipal election. And I think it just creates a better system for us to have in place that's going to last test of time longer.
I would like to include.
We need a second. There was a motion.
Oh,
I'll second for discussion's sake.
There's a motion. So let me get this straight.
well, this is.
You're saying council by ordinance will determine compensation, benefits, or reimbursements of council members. Any changes will not take effect until the start of the next session of council after in
January.
January of the next
following
municipal election.
Correct.
Okay, and there is a second. So discussion.
I'm fine with that, although I'd like to include language that the city council committee attempted to draft that sort of gets at that whole aspect about if you decline, like if you have benefits through your own employer or if you have benefits through your spouse, that a council person would have to avail themselves of using those, and that if they decline benefits, they don't automatically get some kind of mass payment. I don't know how you write that legally into a charter, but I think we have to have something like that in the charter. I don't know what it is. So
I think with that language, I mean, they're going to have to just establish a whole system of how they create their compensation and any possible benefits or no benefits. I mean, it leaves it open for any possibility. And so all of that language is going to be written by ordinance, by council. And so it's changeable, it's fungible in any future time. So what we have what's in place right now gets wiped away.
Right, so like if we have medical care for all someday, and nobody really needs medical care, then that gets taken away as a benefit. And potentially council is also saying like, well, because we're not providing that, we're also not going to give you some big payment because you've declined it or it no longer exists.
Right. I mean, it seems as though this is part of the transition process that's going to occur, that right now, if we would adopt language like this, the council would have to go to ground zero and say, what is our compensation going to be? I mean, it could be $8,000, it could be $12,000, it could be $5,000. And it's not going to have any precursor and predetermination of any benefits at all.
Right.
So, because we're starting from scratch. So your question about, if they decline, but there's nothing to decline because there's nothing that's assumed given.
So are you saying they're starting with no benefits?
They're starting with
no salary, no benefits.
It's a blank slate in terms of what we're establishing. We're not being prescriptive about what any compensation, any benefits, anything, that we're allowing council to determine that to go to the next council after their election. They're not able to give themselves a raise. That's going to go to the next election then.
I would say, I think when we look financially, I think we owe it more to the residents to have a set pay for council. I think when we're looking at budgeting, we're all talking about this finance crisis. I think when we as the subcommittee looked at that, we did look at increasing their salary to $12,000, but we also looked at taking away the benefit, which Amy was speaking about, that if they decline health benefits, they don't get $20,000, which is what they get now. If they decline to take the health benefit that the city offers, they get $20,000. That would go away. And what would happen is they would have to use their employer or spouse's insurance first, and the system would be set up. And I think the language is in actually your writing of the charter. Didn't we put that language in there? Mm-hmm. And it would be that they would have to pay in, because we are looking and we all have came and agreed that, the healthcare cost is the greatest thing on the city right now. So, I mean, to just leave that open, I don't think we're being fair to the residents or the city, because when we say increase the number of council, everybody automatically thinks higher pay, but not if we put these other things in place that remove the $20,000 that maybe 7 members would have received because they turned down the insurance. So now you have to buy in. So the cost factor does come down, and we looked at that in the subcommittee when we made these recommendations. I don't think we should give it open end. I mean, we're talking about giving the finances and not putting no ceilings or caps on any of the taxes. I think we need to be responsible. We need to say, maybe we put a line in there that says it can be changed by, but I think we need to set that standard going in, looking at the budget, and at least present the people that by increasing 9 members to council didn't necessarily increase the cost. And I think that's what we looked at in the subcommittee when we talked about it.
Mr. Feldman, please.
Thank you. I feel like I'm trying to understand, Commissioner Barber, what you're hoping to do here, because what I understand from what's written, what would happen based on what you said, it would be different than what the subcommittees come up with, and it would basically be a scenario in which they would start from scratch and put something in the administrative code. And I guess if that's true, I don't want to mischaracterize your position. What I'd say about my own position is that I really do not think the charter should indicate anything about what the compensation level should be, but I do like the language about how the health benefits are handled in here. And I would be also happy for it just to be stated in the charter that the health benefits can't be offered as well, based on kind of what we've looked at. And now, of course, the addition of two more council members.
Were you saying, did you say you do think health benefits should be continued, or you do not?
What I'm saying is that what I can see from the committee is that they wrote it in such a way that whether it says this or not, I'm getting the sense what they're trying to do is to say, if you have something else, you have to use it. And if it's established that you could receive health, then you can receive health. I would be willing to go further to say you can't. That's something I've changed my mind on, but that's not what the committee proposed, and I'm basically fine with what the committee proposed in that respect. But I'm looking at what's written in the article, and it says, I think, a nominal annual salary in the amount of $12,000 payable monthly, and I just don't think that number should be in there. And I think the council should, in fact, set a salary level through an ordinance process, and if people don't like that, they can vote differently in the election that takes place.
All right. I mean, I would prefer no benefits, just because I think I think that specifically with healthcare benefits, the exposure to the city is far more significant than I imagined before learning some of this stuff. So I would be an advocate for just stripping that out completely, but I'm also comfortable with the idea that that we don't get into this level of specificity about it, that we are silent, that we acknowledge that they should earn a salary, that we defer the amount of the salary and what other benefits council feels they're entitled to a council decision that they have to, propose in a public meeting, debate in a public meeting, hear thoughts from the public, and take a vote that they are then accountable for. So I like the way Mr. Barber's proposing it, which I think does that, which doesn't put us in the middle of it, doesn't invite the possibility of something. I mean, I've been, had the responsibility of making decisions about benefits for our company for 30 years, and I would say it's changed 4 times in that time. And I don't think that in this year we can forecast what it's going to look like 5 or even 10 years from now. And I don't think we should try to. I think we should be broad. We should make it their responsibility to define their own compensation package. They should have to, discuss that in a public forum and hear from the public about it and see where that goes. So.
I think at some point we talked about, maybe a while ago, that a lot of times when you start a part-time job, you don't get, they don't just provide you with health coverage. If you want it, it's offered. I have a part-time job. They offer it to me, but I have to pay for it if I want it.
Right.
So I think that's how I envision this. I don't think benefits should just be given. I think, financially, the city, is placed in a burden. And so I think we should strip that away. But I do like the idea of the public having a say into what city council is being paid. I think that's actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. Giving them access to our program and paying for it. But again, I wouldn't want that to be a decision that we make and that we embed in the charter. I think that should be discussed.
Yeah, I think, my intention is just to allow it to be open, because we don't know. Like John said, it's like I make the determination for my business all the time about what benefits we do have or don't have. And that has changed dramatically in the time that I've had my business. And the value and what it means to any of my employees has changed dramatically over that time. And it probably has for all of you as well, just like the benefits that you have or don't have. And that's all that I'm saying is like, let's not be prescriptive about what those benefits are. And if city council determines that they're not going to have any benefits, and I think the reality is even with the health insurance, I think what we've heard is there was only one or two of the elected positions. I don't think any of the councilors took any of the health insurance.
I haven't been told that. I'm not
I think
sure.
that's,
And I didn't want to ask. I didn't want
yeah, I think when
pose
we
that question.
had one of those conversations, I forgot if the mayor told us that or
Yeah,
if the,
somebody mentioned it.
so, I understand. It's like, I'm not necessarily in favor of like people having benefit, but I think just keeping it open because we don't know what's going to happen 50 years from now, whether something might become valuable that city council determines that, hey, this is how we need to attract people, or this is what is going to be important for us to have some compensation that we have to talk about it in a public forum. They can't just give a benefit, but it's going to have to be discussed at the council with an ordinance passed. And I think it just gives a lot more flexibility and latitude for any future compensation, whether a dollar compensation or benefit. Any of that is going to be just very flexible then.
I just have a question.
I respect that perspective. I think what started this entire conversation is discovering that there was a presentation to city council members if you didn't take the insurance. I'm in favor of anyone who needs insurance, please provide it. But in this case, I feel like it needs to be provided at a cost. And dear future city council members, we ask that you be responsible in that, making those decisions about the health care or not taking the health care. I pay for my benefits, have ever since I had them, and had to pay for my family if I wanted them on. I just think that that's fair, considering the reason we're here is because of the projected deficit in the city budget. And if there are ways, if all the departments are cutting down to the bare minimum, looking at their budgets to see where they can cut costs, I think certainly that piece of the benefits for city council members must also be taken into consideration.
So I seconded this so we could just have this discussion, and Pete, what you proposed, I think I understand. And I want to ask for the purpose of trying to sort this out. To me, I see these kind of as two separate pieces. There's a piece about the salary and there's a piece about the benefits. Would, Pete, you be willing to table what you've moved for us to try and work through both of those items one at a time, maybe starting with the salary?
Well, you could make a motion to amend.
Well, we're
Be easier this way.
others okay with
I just thought that
approaching it that manner?
I thought this covered all the things, but if we want to parse them individually, that's.
I think they should be just.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Move to amend the motion to revert. I'm going to revert to the subcommittee's language and the language currently at 213 in the subcommittee report, striking the $12,000 and leaving that section to only read, each council member elected at the first election under this charter shall receive a nominal annual salary a nominal annual salary payable monthly. So there's no amount listed. And at that point, the purpose of describing it the way that I have would make it that would be a decision by the council they'd have to live with and stand behind before the voters.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
There's a second. So the motion has been amended to, I'm not really sure how to word it.
So we're going?
Yes. The language in 213 without an amount that would be determined by council. And are you including the council that any changes would not take effect until January after the next municipal election?
I envisioned this amended motion to pull in everything that's currently listed on 213 on the screen, striking solely the language I referred to about the amount.
Mr. Feldman, would you be open to including that it be established by ordinance of council?
Yeah, that reflects what my intent is. Thank you.
And I just wanted to ask a question. How does council, and I know recently we had the mayor and get an increase, how does that happen now? How do they raise their,
Could the solicitor respond to that, please?
or council? Because council used to be 5,000, and I don't remember how many years it changed, but it changed to 8,000, and it was changed by ordinance. So by his language, they could change. So even if we would set an amount, could be changed by ordinance. So we could set a limit, and if they felt they wanted to go higher or lower, they would be able to do that by an ordinance, correct? Yeah.
Are you suggesting just leave the 12 and add by ordinance,
Yeah.
and then it would be
Add by
changeable?
ordinance, because that's how they change it now, and if they would see.
I'd be amenable to that.
would that-
Thank you.
Okay.
So okay, sorry. There's a motion to amend the amended motion to put the $12,000 back in,
Yeah.
With,
By
and
ordinance.
the by ordinance,
I second it.
Yeah.
and it's been seconded.
and I just want to confirm with solicitor PEL, based on what we've said, do you feel that the language would enable the council to further change their financial compensation in the future through ordinances? They would not be stuck at the 12,000 that's written into the charter.
Yes, I would agree, subject to it being effective at the subsequent election, that an individual council member in office would not be able to raise their salary, but it would be prospective at the next term of council.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The last line of that, I believe, reflects, it will not take into effect until the date of the commencement of the terms of council members elected at the next regular municipal
Yeah.
election.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify? The amount that's being listed is 12,000 annually, payable by monthly, which means they're getting $1,000 a month.
Right. No,
Okay.
Not 12,000 a month.
Yes, that's why I was freaking out a little bit right
Everyone's
there.
going to council now.
This is another technical question.
Putting it back.
Folks,
Putting it back in.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
But it's established by,
Brian.
as established from time to time by ordinance. We'll can't all talk.
Okay, yeah, just one at a time, please, Ms. Rufo.
Yeah, I got my question answered. I was thinking that it was,
Just another technical question. Does it matter that it says payable monthly? I don't know if council, the city does payroll bi-weekly. Like, does anyone care? Is that a big deal?
I do care, because in theory, someone could get $12,000 check as soon as they're in, rep for a month, and then run.
Sure, but I'm just saying that does it need to say bi-weekly because the city
The ordinance
does it? All right, thank you, I'm done.
The ordinance establishes the frequency of payment.
Is this correct, Ken?
Not if it's.
What's up there?
And if it says monthly.
You're trying to do three things,
Oh, so.
and you're creating ambiguity in your language. So we'll start with your very first sentence. When does that ordinance have to be adopted? So are they, I think if you were establishing a baseline, the by ordinance for the original part is essentially irrelevant if you give in the last sentence, which is council may by ordinance, may raise. I would actually change that to may alter the rate of compensation by ordinance. So that would cover raise or lower. And I would delete the phrase by ordinance in the first sentence so that it's clear that what you're doing is establishing that the base salary, unless otherwise changed by council, is $12,000, which is what I think I'm hearing the intent to be.
That is the intent of
Yes.
the modified motion.
So that would be the first thing I would suggest there. In terms of payment, I would suggest, rather than saying payable monthly, which would then essentially bind council for a longer period, in the last sentence where we talk about the ordinance, where it says council may alter by ordinance but such ordinance. I would add language there or an additional sentence, which is council may through annual ordinances establish the rate or frequency at which compensation is paid. I think that gives the flexibility for council to determine whether there are administrative needs to pay it more or less frequently, financial needs to pay it more or less frequently, and would cover Mr. Dastra's desire to make sure that somebody doesn't get paid up front. Council would obviously have to consider that in adopting its ordinance.
Any other discussion on the amendment to the amendment?
So are we,
Yeah.
are we,
I think I know where you're going, John, which is that,
at this point, have we isolated the decision to, the first decision to just compensation?
Okay. My view is that we have an amendment to a motion. We will vote on the amendment. If the amendment passes, that would supersede the previous amendment and the original motion. If the motion fails, we then return to the first amendment, and we vote on that. If that passes, that supersedes the original motion. If that fails, we're back to the first motion.
If I,
It made perfect
No, I
sense
don't
to
know.
me.
So-
I don't know if I...
am I agreeing to the benefit?
yes, you are actually.
Okay.
Yes, you are. My motion was to basically just, thank you. My motion to make it simple, though for the purpose of dividing these two things, was to say adopt everything that the council subcommittee put together.
Right.
And then I focused exclusively on the compensation portion with the
Right.
trust that the rest of us will come back and talk about the benefit portion afterwards.
Okay. All right.
We can do that, I hope.
Okay.
Compensation. I mean, we're reaching a consensus on the compensation.
We're just stabilizing this language so we can have further discussion.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest a procedure that I think would help everybody here?
Yeah, please.
Rather than trying to go through three motions, if the motions and the motion to amend and the motion to amend would be willing to be tabled, I think I could quote what I think the suggested language would be, and you could make a motion to approve that language.
You got it.
I suggest
Is there
All right.
any,
I like that.
I was just saying, the motions are withdrawn
Yes.
or
Tabled.
tabled. There's,
Either way. Either way is fine.
is there any objection to tabling the original motion?
No.
Okay, hearing none. Mr. Hamburger, please.
So you're taking the first sentence, and this is so that ultimately somebody can read it. The first sentence up on the board will be each council member elected at the first election under this charter shall receive a nominal annual salary in the total amount of $12,000, period.
Okay.
We're then skipping to the last paragraph of that section. Council may alter by ordinance the salary, may alter by ordinance the salary of council, and in such ordinance may also determine the rate or frequency at which payment is made.
In such ordinance.
Thank you, Lynn.
Well, oh, I see, Jerry, you'd already written a different sentence, which also works. So if you leave it the way it was and add the sentence that Jerry put up on the board, that works as well. So council may alter by ordinance the salary of council, and such ordinance will not take effect, right, until I'm having a hard time reading it, so until the date of the commencement of the terms of council members elected the next regular municipal election following adoption of the ordinance, council may establish by ordinance the frequency of compensation.
Okay, and do you want to move that up?
Yeah.
Well, that is going right after the last sentence. All that other stuff is eliminated. That is the motion for the compensation portion, or at least what I understand would be the motion, the financial compensation, and the commission will then discuss separately other forms of compensation.
So is there a motion to approve the language as was just presented?
For the sake of moving this forward, I make the motion to approve the language as Barry has spoken.
Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Now, the second part.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion, again, for purpose of our discussion. I'm warm on this, not sold, but we can talk about it. I make a motion, we adopt the language regarding benefits from the council subcommittee. So that would be reflecting from council members shall also be eligible on, down all the way to such as parking and transportation expenses.
I'm second that.
So, thank you. And, like I said, I'd be open to there being not benefits available at all, but, you, put some thought into language around this. I don't know, is there a reason not to do it this way other than the potential that someone might in fact take up the health benefit and there's more counselors, so it costs more money?
I think so we're in discussion, there's a motion and second, as I understand.
Yes.
But,
Yes, we have. It's been moved and seconded.
All right, so I think health insurance is a very important benefit that council members should be able to tap into in some regard, especially because this is one of those jobs you do. It might be a part-time job, but this is one of those jobs where you have a lot of contact with people. You have a lot of contact with disease vectors. So it's, for me, I think a huge benefit that counselors have health insurance because we don't know what kind of background they're coming from. We don't know if they themselves are coming from situations where their health care is secure. I think that having the opportunity for council members to access health care is to the benefit of the residents that expect them to serve.
So are you saying that it should be available to them, but that the city, and that the city should pay for that, or?
No, I'm in support of what's up there right now. Like, this is a step, maybe I'll go as far as to say maybe the right direction for the moment in time we're in. Like, one of the big concerns I had in our subcommittee was like, it's hard, and we went back and forth about this a little bit. It's hard for me to imagine a pay-in system, for example, because we're self-insured. Like with someone else, they're like, hey, per employee, you pay this rate, and then an employer will pay X percent and an employee will pay Y. But in this scenario, it's like someone could theoretically tap into a system. They could be grossly sick, and there's no paying into a system enough to make up, financially speaking, for that loss. But like from the perspective of residents to their elected official, I'm like, no, if your elected official is unwell, but you think that this sort of healthcare will help them serve better, and I believe it will. I believe that sometimes these situations are temporary, sometimes they're more long-term and permanent. I do think it's important that elected officials have access to proper health care, and I think that that's what this language does without creating an undue financial burden.
I'm concerned, my concern would be for the family members of any council member eligible for benefits must be added on to the insurance policy for standard fees set by the compensation ordinance. I'm not sure family members need to be covered. I'm just opening that up for a conversation.
I'd like to, actually, if I may ask a question, just a professional opinion, trying to stay out, just of a clarification. If the motion to include this fails, would that preclude council from providing benefits or not? Would that, just that separate, I'm just trying to determine an explanation of this discusses benefits. What if it is not in there?
Is your question?
Well, this is actually a question to.
Do we have to say that they're eligible for benefits?
That's what I'm just trying to get a clarification on what would happen. Yes.
So ambiguity is what makes court cases. Language is what needs to be clear. If you leave nothing in and you say nothing about insurance, you leave a court to opinions. Did the charter give the city the authority to pay benefits or not? And that would be an open question. I can't guarantee you where the court would go. So for me, you have multiple options. Option A is you can have a sentence that says council has the power to authorize the payment of benefits, something along Mr. Barber's line, which would cover whether we're self-insured, whether we have insurance policies, allow them to determine it. That's a general, keep it simple, council decides. There's no input here in the charter then from the commission in terms of we don't want you to have X, Y, or Z. Another option is to say council shall not have the authority to award any compensation other than the financial compensation set forth in this charter or set forth as required by this charter, which would clearly prohibit a court from entering an order or council from passing an ordinance that allows that compensation to be created. And then the third option is somewhere in between where you're trying to create some ability with some parameters. And there's flexibility there, but it's the question and the will of this commission as to which way to proceed.
I would prefer that we say the second thing, which is it's not available. But if we're going to make it available, my opinion would be something that ends more or less at the first comma. Council members should be eligible to receive other benefits as deemed appropriate and included in the compensation ordinance with any wordsmithing from our solicitor. That we do not drift into the level of specificity in the rest of that language. I think that's far too detailed for a charter. But that's what I said.
Would you like to make a motion to amend that?
Before you do,
No, I don't want to make a motion. I just wanted to say, say that and let the rest of you talk about it.
I'm open to that because I can understand the flexibility you're trying to create. The only thing, I would want to include the second comma though, to say except for additional payments for declining said benefits.
I'd be up for that.
Fine.
Is there a motion?
Yeah,
Is there a motion to amend?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm good with that one. If it's going to go in there, I'll take that. Yeah.
Darlene didn't hear.
John was saying that he's open to adding something. If we're going to add something, he's open to adding council members shall also be eligible to receive other benefits as deemed appropriate and included in the compensation ordinance. And then I said, I'm cool because I understand he's trying to create some flexibility. I'm cool with that, except I want to add the second part after that, which is except for additional payments for declining said benefits. So there's no more healthcare check.
Yeah,
Right.
100%.
So I will take that as that was a motion.
That's a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
That language. There's a second. Is there any discussion on the new language about reimbursements for not taking benefits?
So we're saying they will not get reimbursed for taking benefits. And what
yes.
about their family members? We're taking that out?
We're taking it out, but we're not leaving it as an impossibility. We're just specifying that council has the ability with their compensation ordinance to determine that sort of benefits package. We're not specifying if that includes or excludes family members.
So you're making the assumption that the council has to act appropriately and reasonably in any of this, which is the intention of kind of the original thing that I put on the plate, but that's fine. I mean, it's just like trying to put it in their hands, both with compensation and with benefits, that they have the opportunity to determine what those are, and they have to do that by ordinance. And if we want to add in the language of I think we're making a lot out of this, idea of somebody getting compensation for declining it, and I don't know, Barry, I understand your desire to have something very clear, and would that be an assumption that somebody would get?
Well,
currently
there is a policy for city employees, which if they have if they have insurance elsewhere, there's an ability for many city employees to get in lieu of the benefit that was given to them by being a city employee, which is health insurance benefits. It's a cash payment. It's not equal to the amount, but it's a cash payment. And that policy may be changed in the future. And in fact, I know it's under consideration. It's being looked at as part of the budget process. So I think the concept here is if you want to specifically prohibit it, you would need to put it in. If you want to leave it to council's discretion, you could put the period again after, and not have the accept language, and then council could decide it. Policies, as Mr. Barber has pointed out, and, I've seen council compensation and policy change since I started working with the city in 1994. And we've had multiple variations, gone different ways. There's no guarantee the city is going to be self-insured 20 or 30 years from now.
Right.
So, for me, my personal view, not a legal view, but a personal view for somebody who might have to work with the city in the future, is that you're leaving the flexibility avoids the need for an amendment to the charter and/or for potential litigation.
I recognize that what you brought forward is about flexibility, and that what currently is up there without any changes is way more rigid than giving flexibility. But I thought it was important for us to continue moving. I liked what John's putting out there, because we're essentially trying to meet in the middle on an issue. Because when it comes to the healthcare benefit, we're not talking about small numbers here. We're talking about if the salary is currently $8,000 and the number we've been given is $21,000, we're talking counselors are getting over 2.5 times more what they're making in a year from that. So it's not small numbers, but I appreciate.
Nobody's using it.
I think that we need, whether or not they're using it, though, it still means there's a possibility, and there's a genuine concern that the opportunity could be abused. And we're talking about financial matters. So I think it is important to include language that allows for flexibility, but serves the purpose of why we're all here, which is finances.
Is there any other discussion?
Can we restate where this leaves us, please?
Right.
Yes.
I was gonna
Could-
say
could-
statement, I'm not
See
clear
the whole
about what
thing.
I
Yeah, what would the new statement say?
Oh, okay, thank you.
Is that good?
Would you like me to read what I think the motion is?
Yes, I would, please.
Council members shall also be eligible to receive other benefits as deemed appropriate and included in the compensation ordinance, except for additional payments for declining said benefits, period.
Okay, that is the
And the
motion.
current vote is to approve that or to approve that?
It's a motion to amend.
It's a motion to
And we need
amend.
If we all say, yep, we agree with that amendment, we gotta agree.
Then we have to vote
Then
to
we vote
approve
on the
charter.
Yes.
the whole paragraph, the whole section 213, the new 213.
All right, so what do we do next?
We vote.
We vote.
Call to question.
Question has been called. So, all in favor of the compensation language that Mr. Hanwood just recited and is on the screen, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. So now the motion is, we have a new language for section 213. If we could call on you again, the entire 213,
I make a motion to approve compensation section 213.
we already have a motion to approve that.
Oh, do I have to second it?
Nope,
Oh,
nope.
oh, what do I-
We're back to the original. So if you could just, to refresh our memory, what the entire paragraph says, please.
Skipping around. Well, he's got parts of it, you've got part of it.
Well, it starts right here. Right? Do you want to read it?
Well, you want to read it?
He could read it, it's all good, as long as we all get
As
to
long
the
as
same place.
as long as
Doesn't matter who
yeah,
reads.
you cut and paste the Missouri, right? This is the whole text that I see.
Could somebody hand him a microphone, please?
Yeah, microphone. Each council member elected at the first election under this charter shall receive a nominal annual salary in the total amount of $12,000. Council may alter by ordinance the salary of council, and such ordinance will not take effect until the date of the commencement of the terms of council members elected at the next regular municipal election following adoption of the ordinance. Council may establish by ordinance the frequency of compensation. Then we go to, council members shall also be eligible to receive other benefits as deemed appropriate and included in the compensation ordinance, except for additional payments for declining said benefits.
Yeah.
And then the last paragraph, a council member may receive reimbursement for expenses paid by them in the performance of their duties, such as parking and transportation expenses.
Great, thank you, Mr. Cross. Is there any more deliberation? Call the vote. Is there more?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we said something, and I don't know where that is from the subcommittee. Didn't we talk about education, training? Is that somewhere else?
We haven't got
Okay,
that
as long as it's in
That's
there, I'm
required.
good, we don't have to discuss
Yeah,
it.
that
I
is,
just wanted to make
Okay.
sure.
yeah, I don't,
Any other?
but we have it.
Okay, so I'll take that as end of deliberations. Are all in favor of Section 213? Please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Hearing one, motion passes. We're done with City Council Article 2.
So actually, we did move on to something, we moved past composition really fast. There's an item there's other items actually that I believe there is a desire for conversation, but out of respect to some people who have given thought to this idea, I want to circle back to composition to say, composition, sorry, the two words are so similar and each is falling out of my mouth.
Clarify.
Section 202. Because we had discussions about minority party representation.
That's
and-
off the table,
Why?
because we've already approved Section 202 by motion. That was a separate section. We discussed that back in
literally-
March.
It's literally in the composition section that the subcommittee put together. We didn't specify subsections of a section.
Okay, we had discussed, my ruling, in my opinion, is that we discussed that back in March and had decided to move on from that.
So do we, if we want to talk about it, do we have to like put a motion, or are you saying?
You'd have, yes.
So I make a motion that we open discussion about minority party representation using the language composed by the subcommittee as a springboard,
Springboard, oh, I'm sorry.
an idea springboard to start discussions.
Oh. So there's a motion to add language about minority party representation.
It's up here.
Yep.
There we go. So, okay, so Section A. So there is a motion to add language about minority party representation. Is there a second? Hearing none, the motion fails.
I want to know why.
Well, we can't.
If you,
The-
if you
the
second
motion-
it, we
the
can.
motion-
Right, I'm sorry. Can we try again?
Okay, there's a motion. Okay, there's a motion about minority party representation. Is there a second?
A second.
There is a second. Is there discussion?
Yes, so I just want to articulate why I put this in here. Something in the conversation about districts has been discussed. So we see this issue on like a state level, which is gerrymandering. There is no way, there's just not a way for anyone to create a Republican majority district in Lancaster City at this current climate. It's just not a possibility because the percentages don't work out and the populations are thoroughly mixed. So I do think though, however, we're talking about a council that at the current moment is 7 members and 25% of the city does not register as a Democratic voter. So to me, when I look at that difference in how the construction of the city council or the members of city council and the registration and likely opinions of voters, it says to me something is occurring in a systemic way that makes it an impossibility for these people to break into the system. And it's been almost 20 years since anybody has represented the city who's not been a Democrat. I think this is a legitimate conversation we need to discuss. And so the language here just specifies that essentially, I'll try to boil it down to this. So we've agreed 9 members. Let's assume that we're talking staggered terms here. Let's just make that assumption, and we're running 5 people in this race. It means that 4 Democrats can run. Voters still get 5 votes. So if there's someone outside the scope of their party, they go, I'd like to use my quote-unquote spare vote, I will vote for this other person. So it doesn't guarantee any specific affiliation representation on council. All it does is ensure that there's a more open playing field and that it can't get cluttered out by one single party.
Mr. Feldman.
Say something, choice between parties.
Thank you. We discussed this previously, and at that time, I did not support this, and I don't support it now, especially in the light of the fact that we've just decided we're going to add 2 additional council seats. Before, it was a circumstance that if you're a minority party candidate, you simply need to get one of the votes of the 4 in that election that or 3 in that election that they wanted. I don't know what the split will be with 9, but 5, 4, it's easier just by that change alone. Ultimately, I think that the minority parties should have to win an election like every other municipality in this county, and I think that that's sufficient.
The county doesn't do it that way. That's a municipality. It's a large one, but
Sure.
So the county does have a system. This is a change from what the county has. The county prevents voters from voting for every single open seat. They say you can only vote for 2 candidates, with there being 3 open seats when there's county commissioners up. This is a change from that in the sense that voters can still vote for every open seat. This is a restriction on more partisan activity than it is on the voters of the city.
Screen went off.
That's not your fault.
Are there,
First of all, I have an issue with the council may change their affiliation once seated. Makes me think that somebody could just change their party just to get in there, then change it back. I'm not in support of minority party representation.
We don't know what happened. It's up here. I'm not asleep.
It's the projector.
It's the projector.
Maybe it's overheated. I'm not kidding, that's a problem with that.
He's very rude.
Restarting it.
okay.
Okay.
Additional comments, discussion?
No, I just wanted to make sure we had discussed it in this meeting because it's something that I think there was some interest in my conversations with the public, but I definitely understand your point. We're expanding council, so it's going to change in other ways too. But I didn't want to leave this and just say, oh, no, let that go. So I think there is a consensus on the issue.
So, well, there is a motion with somebody, you can either withdraw the motion or we can call the question.
I'll call the question.
Well, actually, you can't call the question on your own motion. Would somebody else like to call the question?
I will.
The question's been called. All those in favor of adding the language on minority party representation, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Motion fails. I think we're on to Article 8 on budget and finance.
We have,
Mr. Cross, I'll give this back to you.
thank you. We have copies to hand out here? Here. Huh? Oh, yeah. Number 8. We're going to do budget first? Budget first,
Yeah,
John?
the budget and finance, and then ethics.
Yeah, we'll get the screen going. We're handing out the copies of the budget.
Thank you, sir. Here, if you want to just.
Is this the first time there's?
No.
This is your land.
Yeah, John's going to handle it through the... Mr. McMahon, you want to start with the subcommittee report?
Yeah, I'll, the big mic.
Oh, sir.
Thanks. All right, I offered to take the lead on introducing this, and I'll take them, there's two things that are new since the last time we discussed this. One is, Sec 809, tax revenue increase limitation, and one is, I don't know what,
We did the public notice? The
public notice,
Yeah, that would be 805.
805,
Right.
It's a sub-bullet.
Public inspection?
no.
Notice in here.
What?
Public notice in here. Do you have a new copy?
In C.
Oh, yeah,
805.
C, 805C,
You got the new copy?
which is on page
It's
3.
not highlighted, but it's there.
Yeah, right,
Well,
so,
printed them out for you.
yeah, so I'll start, let's take them one at a time. And we'll start with the tax revenue increase limitation. So this is the result of discussions that we had, to consider putting constraints on tax increases. And I can't remember how much of this you've heard previously, but based on the advice of PEL and our solicitor, the thing that is not an option is to put in place a specific limit on a specific tax. We may not replicate our current situation where there's a millage limit, and we may not put a specific cap on your earned income tax, the rate of taxation. So the proposed solution, if we want to have a limit in place, is what you see in 809, which is to put a limit on total tax revenue collected from one year to the next, which would be to say, we may not, city council may not increase the total taxes collected by a specific percentage. Would it be helpful to, I'll read the whole section just as that's been our practice. The city shall not increase all sources of general fund tax revenues by more than XX% over the preceding year. General fund tax revenues shall be defined as all taxes as authorized for the city by applicable law and shall not include fees, regular income, grants, one-time sources, proceeds from debt issuance, or revenues restricted to use for debt service, proceeds from the sale of assets, departmental and utility fees, and other restricted revenues. Total tax revenues combined from said sources shall not exceed an increase of XX% over the preceding year unless council by a majority vote of its members plus one shall by resolution on or before the first council meeting in November authorize the XX% limitation to be exceeded for 1 year for the forthcoming year, and those additional revenues shall not be used to determine the XX ceiling for the succeeding year. So setting a limit of how much may be collected, how much of an increase may be collected, but also providing the opportunity for a supermajority of council, majority plus one, to exceed that limit if there's circumstances warrant that. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So to exceed that for 1 year?
For 1 year.
Then it has to go back to the,
Then that establishes a new year.
That's so you're
So-
not compounding.
okay. But that last part of it, there's additional revenue should not be used to determine the percentage ceiling for the next year.
All right.
So it sounds like it's a 1 year thing and then it's like done.
Yeah, sounds like a once and done to me too.
And then you
go back to the
And then you go back to the,
Right.
Is that?
is that, that's why I'm asking that last
right.
qualifier
Do
to
you
the,
want to go to, if it's a
These are-
percent?
Again, these are your options.
Yeah.
The way it's written, I would interpret the way it's written as what you're saying, Mr. Barber, which is you can't include the increase that's over the percentage amount. So if you're going
Yeah.
from,
That makes
if you got it, I'll use a dollar figure instead of a percentage. But if council authorized by a supermajority to increase tax revenues by $1,000 over the limit, that $1,000, you would go back to the limit amount, not the previous years, but to the maximum limit amount for establishing the base for the next year.
Yeah, okay.
That's how I interpret that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's 100%.
So you don't add the increase into creating a compounded impact.
Right. Yeah.
That's the way it's written now. Again, these are your options.
Let's start with the basic question, which is, do we want to include this in the charter?
I think that it would be helpful to have this, I mean, there is concerns among the community about tax increases, in particular how it impacts people's individual paychecks and annual income. And as I understand, that's what this would be limiting, right? These are the taxes it would be limiting, the property tax collection, the earned income tax collection, local service tax, and real estate transfer, right? Yeah, okay, so I would be in favor of including this.
I'm okay with, I do have one concern though. Because like I understand inflation can go insane in 1 year and I don't want to create something that's too prohibitive for the long haul. But in a sense, council could every year, as long as they have a supermajority, they could just totally disregard this. So I would like to see some language that maybe says like, if it can't be used twice in a row without a citizen vote on the matter or something, that idea of revolving doors.
You can't use citizen vote or referendum for this. No. We excluded that when we did the referendum section.
Isn't it an exclusion of, isn't that an exclusion
It
of
would be too
state
late to
law?
get to the voters.
Isn't it a state law exclusion of referendums?
You
No.
can't have a binding referendum to replace a council action. Correct. Council can't say to people, we don't want to take this vote, you do it. That's a binding referendum.
So it's a state law that says you can't referendum the budget.
It depends. What I hear Mr. Dasher saying is if it's exceeded twice, then somehow it goes to a referendum. But then council would be abrogating their ability to do it. Because every year there's a decision to be made and it's a budget process. So it's an independently by year. If you limit to the number of years, beside the fact that you already know what the projections are going to be because your budget section requires a multiple year, you're sort of hamstringing both the administration and council to provide vital and necessary services.
Right.
Because you're responding, you're forcing the alteration of services for an artificial means.
No, like I understand that, and that's like the limitation is a divided issue for me because on one hand it's like, yeah, I do think this will give more public confidence, but on the other hand, like if inflation goes through the roof, then yeah, we're cutting services if we can't raise taxes. So I understand the challenge. My only concern is just that this limitation is more symbolic in a situation where a council just always supermajorities any increase. Like, yeah, it doesn't affect the ceiling, but what's the ceiling matter if they always have a supermajority is what I'm saying.
Well, they'll have voters to answer for.
That's a good point.
So we talked about this a bit, I guess, in the subcommittee, and personally, you're like, well, what does it matter, the supermajority? And for this reason, I do not think this revenue limit is a good way to run an organization. Ultimately, they need to make choices for themselves and stand behind those choices before the voters, and I don't, the idea that you would not give them the ability to make those choices and then face those consequences and repercussions, I don't see the value in doing that. That said, if this body were to say you get a majority plus one in order to indicate that this truly has the support of the co-equal branch of government, fine. But beyond that, the concept really bothers me.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Carl. I mean, it seems as though we've been trying to, one of the things that we've been trying to do is establish flexibility, and this seems to put governors on some of that flexibility. I understand the concerns around it, but again, if there seems to be an adequate workaround around it, but I think it kind of sets a weird precedent that we're in, we're one of the things that we've been talking about all along is like, okay, trying to create the flexibility around how we can raise revenue, because we know that there's a situation that we need to raise revenue, and now we're saying, well, we can only raise revenue a certain amount, that's limiting that. And so it just seems to be stepping backwards from what we were trying to accomplish. But if the supermajority issue absolves us of that, whatever.
I got a question for Pia. So let's say the city doesn't increase any tax rates, but obviously under an income tax system, we're going to see more variability in revenue brought in. So if the system were to exceed that increase without any instruction of council, not waiving us, out of council, what would happen? Would they be forced to lower tax rates?
That's the decision that you have to weigh when you set the rate. If you set it too low, you're forcing the council to either reduce taxes because the natural growth of, as you heard from PFM, the natural growth of EIT is 4 to 5% a year. If that's 30-some% of your budget, you're looking at 2% built in. So if you were to say a 2% increase in total tax revenue, you would hit that every year. You couldn't increase it at all. And your expenses, as you heard from PFM, increased 3 to 4% a year. So you're building in a mismatch. What you have to look at is a range that's not too permissive and not too restrictive.
Right.
And that's the range that you think normal expenditure growth occurs and normal revenue growth occurs, and above that is what you build into a tax increase. Because that's the only reason you have tax increases, when your natural growth is outstripped by your expenses. So you do need tax increases in the system, but because caps are removed under home rule, this allows some measure of moderation. This allows a moderation in the budget process whereby the mayor proposes a certain amount, council gets on board or doesn't get on board, then the budget process evolves towards that.
Right.
In your committee, did you discuss this particular, what,
What percent?
yeah.
We did have some discussions, and it varied. So, you know, it went from 3.5 to 6%. So I was kind of on the lower end. And as far as being able to change the vote by council majority, since we couldn't do referendum, which was explained, I do think that we should put in there that any debt that we do not use when we get bonds and stuff, and we do not spend all those bonds, and that money is reallocated, that would have to go toward the general budget before council can say, let's raise it. Like every year at council time, we sit there and I'm just going to use an example. I want to use the Barney Yule Plaza. When they bid it out or whatever, they said it's going to cost X amount of dollars. When we got the report and it was done, there was money left over, maybe $100,000. I'm just throwing numbers out there. But I would think that money, what we do is reallocate that to the next capital projects that we have, or whatever projects are waiting that don't have enough money. I would say that money would have to go to the general budget before council could approve to raise whatever that percentage we say. If it's 6%, well, then you can't raise it over that and then still have money that's unspent and spend it on something else instead of applying it to the general budget. I think that we have to have some kind of control. I was very, and John and Carl can tell you, very uneasy about removing the caps and saying there's no ceiling now. And so I think the way it was explained, that we do that by putting a cap on the revenue. How much can that increase each year? We looked over, I think, 12 years. Was it 12 years of 12 years of financing? And I think there was 1 year that was over 3.5%. Most of the time, it was 3% or no increase. So it wasn't like it increased every single year. We're telling them now, you can increase it every year for whatever amount. And I don't know, but I know how I am. If someone's giving me some money to spend and we got a city that needs things, most likely I'm going to spend it if I'm allowed. So I see there needs to be some type of restriction there, either a lower percentage rate or that there's other things that must happen before that rate increases.
So can you explain again what you were talking about, the earned income tax is going to grow naturally over time, and if it goes over a certain amount, then it could impact this?
Not in each individual tax, total taxes in the aggregate. If you sell a big property, real estate transfer tax will become big that year. Okay, and if you anticipate it as part of the budget process. But that part is a small percentage of your budget. If you remember that, your bar chart in your presentation, real estate taxes are the biggest part of it, then the percentage is like 30 or 40% EIT. So those percentages would be dropped. But if you do get a windfall, you're going to run into that. And they'll have to budget for that windfall. So that would be, if I'm explaining it right,
But you said something about 30%, and Maxine is saying that or you guys are saying that
No.
Yeah.
it's different. What I'm saying is that the composition of taxes, remember that bar chart you have in the presentation?
Yeah.
Where it shows real estate and earned income? Those percentages of taxes, if real estate isn't rising at all, but earned income tax is rising.
No, I
Okay.
mean collectively, all four of those taxes.
So I think,
The committee was saying that you're suggesting a 3 to 6%.
Yeah, I think
for
I'm,
this
I'm,
rate?
in- I would be more,
John
in-
did not
I would be more interested in 6.
Okay.
What
And,
were you- what-
and
what
is
is-
that because the general fund tax revenues have fluctuated that much over these 12 years that you all have?
And I want to find the file and read to everybody what those were. I will get that. I will say for those of us who represent the higher end of, supporting the higher end of that range, I don't want to be anywhere near the year over year number. Because what that means is every single year you need to worry, am I going to have a problem getting the fire truck that I need? Am I going to have a problem hiring the next cadet class of police officers? That's my position. I think that might be John's. Let me continue
And then it also
discussion and I'll
becomes-
grab it.
It becomes, then if it becomes a thing that happened, if we hit that limit all the time, then it just becomes standard procedure.
Right.
And we never think twice about exceeding the limit either. So it needs to be,
I want a question on just my interpretation. If suddenly incomes raised very, very high, that, I think theoretically, if that number were set low, suddenly it's over just because suddenly city residents are making a lot more money.
right.
Is that an issue, or is that by plan, or is that?
that would be an issue.
That's a real issue.
That could be an issue. That could be
Yeah,
an
I
issue.
But I will say some potential positive counterpoint to that is, we have a multitude of taxes, and one of the conversations has been shifting away from a property tax-based system. So maybe if we do see benefits under an income-based tax system, even though I do agree, it's stressful every year, will be stressful, but it would provide an mechanism to say, okay, taxes got to be lowered, and then prioritizing which one should be lowered. And my assumption is that we would target property taxes to be lowered
Right.
first.
Why would we, anytime you change around the tax system, you are distributing benefits to some people and not giving them to other people. I really do not want to be in a situation where year over year, we're making these choices. We are not, of course. Council's making these choices over these people get this benefit and those people aren't. And then that changes again the next year and the next year and the next year. That is what happens
I need some clarification.
when the revenue grows and you say, I'm comfortable with just dropping the property tax level. I'm comfortable with just dropping the EIT tax level. I do not think that's a good place to be in at all. And I'm sorry, I also can't find that piece of paper because it was a piece of paper, not, maybe Ms. Bird has it.
Yeah.
And it supports her point, potentially, I guess. It's got lower limits than what John and I are proposing, so maybe
Right.
she or John can point it out.
So when you say certain people getting one benefit over another, are you saying tax cuts essentially?
Well,
That's-
not targeted tax cuts, but I'm just saying, when you change tax policy, you're giving benefits to one group of people and not another. That's how it works when you decide what the tax rates should be. So if you keep them the same over time, then you just get to a place where there's
Here it is.
an understanding, comfortability, normalization, awareness of what people will owe year over year.
I think I understand what you're saying, but the reason why I'm making that point is because we've entered this process because on a financial level, we're worried about the financial sustainability of the city, but we've also had conversations about how the earned income tax and having flexibility there provides opportunity to protect people on fixed and low incomes, because as property taxes increase, some people might be pushed out of their situation. So I guess I'm saying I do hear your point, but I would argue that a push to move away from the property tax system is something towards better equity. But that's a council thing. At the end of the day, yeah, we don't get to make those calls.
Yeah, I don't dispute that. I'm just saying if you have to change it back and forth every single year, that's a problem.
Right. Yeah,
I would agree with that. I think it just sounds very unstable to me.
Yes.
And I don't know if you guys thought of, alternatives to that, or what, is that what's coming next?
Well, is the alternative, we just don't have
The
this,
alternative is we don't do
just
this.
don't put this whole thing in, because this is creating the problem. And if we just, I understand the theoretical notion of, well, we don't want taxes. It's like, look, this is how the world works, and we can't control against any extreme thing that might happen, that might do, it's like, I know that we've been saying this, and Darlene, you probably don't want to hear that's like, you're going to vote people out of office if the taxes raise too much, but that's how our system works. This is how it works on the federal level, that's how it works on the state level, and, we don't have limits of how tax increases or decreases or anything can get put into place on any of those levels. So if we just get rid of this whole piece, I think that makes the most sense.
So to me, the reason this is in front of us is because we heard some interest in something like this. This is, to your question, this is the way that's available to us to do it. So if we, I'm not necessarily sitting here advocating to do it, but this is in response to the question of how could we do it. So this is the way. So if we don't like this, I'm comfortable with it being removed.
Pete, you were saying the way you do away with this problem is you do away with it altogether. That is one way. I'd just like to say, if you set a threshold that is reasonably high enough, that is also a way of dealing with it, which I think is where we were getting to. The threshold question, what should the threshold be? Darlene, I wish I had the paper in front of me, but yes, it was like between I think the max in 1 year was like 4.5 or something like that, usually around 3.5. Right. And my statement previously was, I just wouldn't want to be anywhere near what that year over year is now. And so when I hear John say something like 6, I can live with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think 6 is high, asking the residents, but I think saying at 3, and I do understand every year, but I think that's why we put things in place that we're going to do a capital budget. We're going to be looking at the budget 2 years in advance. So we shouldn't have to reach that 6%. And like we said, over the 12 years, it's 1 here, none here. The highest I saw, I think, was 3.5. 1 year it was 3.5% that it increased. But I do think one of the things that we talked about, and not that was the only thing for the charter, but was the common ways to produce more revenue. And so I think setting some kind of standard, I don't agree with 6%. I think it's high, but I think that I would be happy with 3.5%. Is the top, because I think all of us have to function within a budget. So, and if we're projecting 5 years ahead, we're planning, we're looking at the budget every 2 years. I think we put stuff in the budget and finance portion article that would have us prepared for that we're not struggling every year. If it comes to a point that we're reaching that every year, then something we're doing in that budget prior to isn't working. Because we shouldn't come up every year we're hitting that 3%, or we need the council to override that and go higher. Then all of our projections that we're putting into the article are not working. And we said we're going to go out 5 years. They got to produce budget 2 years. We're looking at the budget in October. So we got more time to look and say, where can we cut? What can we do? How do we, make some changes that doesn't hit that 3% every single year? So, I'm just one that believes we got to change it, and it should be some kind of ceiling. I don't think it should be no ceiling.
So in order to move along to something, I'm going to, tell me if this is out of order, make a motion that we adopt the language with the threshold that the Finance Chair McGrann has proposed as 6%.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a motion and a second for the languages written with a 6%. Any discussion on that?
Yeah, I'll actually just add the reason I'm seconding that, like, I actually think it should be higher than 6. Because I'm worried about.
To amend?
No, not yet, because I just want to explain why I say that. Like, I do respect the idea of having a cap on, like, revenue just because, of, like, I get it. We don't always trust the entity and we don't want to just see a brazen increase, but it's only 1/2 of the cost equation. Like, we're talking about revenues, but also expenses. And when I was counting, I don't know how trustworthy Investopedia is on this, but I was like, inflation rates for the last century. About, I think 20% of the time, inflation exceeded 6%, which makes me go, yeah, 6% is like, that could lead to more awkward situations. I do think it needs to be higher than 3 or 4% because those numbers might only mitigate inflation. So I would personally enjoy seeing maybe even 10%. But this is a complex issue. I'm willing to give this language a shot because I do support the idea of the language. But yeah, 6 is kind of like my low end.
Would you like to make a motion to make it 10%?
You want to change it?
Are you making a motion to make it 10%?
Do you
No.
have any
I don't agree with that.
comments?
That's
I think
okay.
that's too much.
Yep.
That's
I mean,
way
And
too
I
high.
wanted to go, like Carl was saying, with the committee chair.
Yeah.
Since there was a discussion multiple times and they've come up with this, I think
Yeah.
I'm in favor of what the chair recommended.
As I am as well.
I mean, I guess, as we look at the expense side of things, right? So 60% of our expenses are in human capital, fire, police. That doesn't include other city staff. And a 3% increase in that cost every year is kind of a given. And, that doesn't really address any other expenses or any other extraordinary things that might happen. And so I think, as just an absolute low end of things, I mean, we're already hitting that probably on a regular basis from union negotiated contracts, other inflationary pressures. So it just seems like that. I mean, I don't know. I just think not putting any limitations would be in our best interests because we don't know what can happen, what's going to happen, and how that moves forward. And if we set, a really high limit, I think it just establishes a weird precedent of like, why are we putting language in there that has such a high limit to it?
Mr. Cross?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just for clarity and some background on where this comes from, we're discussing it in the terms of the budget. This is not necessarily a budget control article section. This is more in the lines of taxpayer protection because home rule allows no rate caps. So what this does is it gives some assurance to taxpayers that the total taxes they pay will not increase over a certain amount. That doesn't mean the budget won't increase by that much. It doesn't mean expenditures can't be cut. What it means is there is a built-in level of assurance that the citizens know their total taxes from all sources will not increase by more than X%. And if they need to exceed by more than X%, their representatives, by a special number of votes, will allow that excess. But it's more of a taxpayer protection and less of a budget tool. The budget tool is built in, as Ms. Byrd said, in the hearings and the expanded public comment, all that. This is more taxpayer protection. When they read the charter, they understand there really is not unlimited taxation.
Yeah, I understand that. I think what Pete was getting at is we don't know what the expenses are going to be.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of the expenses for local government are human capital. And pensions are expensive, healthcare is expensive, human capital and city staff, they should get increases in pay that allow them to live their lives and not have to, they should have comparable pay. So like those things are going to increase. So I guess that's what I hear you.
Yeah.
I was just elaborating on what
Sure.
Pete was saying, though I'm leaning towards keeping it in and sticking with your recommendation.
Which was 6%.
And I just want to say that, like you said, again, it is for the taxpayer. We have to sell this charter. If we go say your taxes can increase 6% every year, that's what we're allowing them to do. How many? Well, your revenue. So it could be, and I truly understand, it could be 0, but it could go up as high as 6. So it could be a year that your earned income is going up 2%. It could be a year that your property tax is going up.
No,
It could be, and what we said as we were studying the commission, we're trying to do something that's going to gear away from that. And we're not giving them that because we don't know how that's going to work out between the 3 taxes that we have, whether it's going to be property tax. Maybe we don't get enough earned income tax. So now you're saying we're going to have to raise your property tax 6%. If we can't raise it all across the board.
No, because property taxes are a portion of that. Remember that.
Well, only if they grow. But if they don't grow and we need 6%.
As you saw, they grow normally about 2% a year on the EI, because of total EIT.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say 6% limit, it's not any individual tax. It's
Right.
total tax revenue.
And I understand that, but what I'm saying, if the earned income tax does not grow, we're still telling the administration, you have a 6% you could raise limit or ceiling, whatever. I don't want to use
But there's also still the part of it where city council people are accountable to the electors, and people have to vote them to remain in office or replace them. That we get back to that too.
Yeah,
I
just
really
wanna
believe
clarify
6% is going to be hard to sell.
Yeah, but it's not raising somebody's individual income tax or property tax by 6%. It's the collective revenue,
Right.
obtained,
Tax revenue.
the collected tax revenue can only be raised 6%, not somebody's individual tax
Right.
rate.
So,
To raise somebody's individual tax rate by 6%, those people would not be reelected.
Right.
part of why I get anxious about the cap and why I was saying I feel like it's a little too low. I know I was talking about inflation and all that, but one of the things that's a huge variable here is like, what happens when Park City sells? Like, that's going to be a big tax change that year, and I don't want that to throw the whole tax system of the city out of whack. Like, I definitely want to protect the taxpayers, which is why I think giving this a shot is worth it. But I think, especially in the light of the recent economic conditions, it's
And we should, that should be a windfall to the city, in that moment.
Yeah, I guess all I have to say about what you said is that's certainly a legitimate concern, and we can't know the future. We looked at those year-over-year changes, and I think the chair tried to pick a figure that sounded appropriate, but if you don't think it is high enough, then I think the right thing to do is to say it should change to something else in this motion.
I'm okay trying out 6 because, like I was saying earlier, there's a possibility that this is how we start the conversations about changing other tax rates. I think 6 is workable. I think we justly have anxiety about this, but we shouldn't fear it.
If my hearing is okay, I think Ms. Berg called the question.
Yes.
All right, so the question has been called. All in favor of the motion for the language with 6%, please say aye. All opposed?
Aye.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. So the motion passes.
The other item, hopefully more straightforward, is on page 3. It is section 805C. This was to the question about how can we assure the public that when they have a question during the budget approval process that they'll receive a meaningful answer. And so the language there is, within a reasonable time following the public hearing and no less than 7 days prior to the adoption of the budget, the mayor or their designee shall prepare a summary of the questions received during the public question period with relevant answers arranged by similar topic. This summary shall be publicized in a widely and readily available form and manner as provided by the administrative code.
Mr. McGrann, I just think you're missing one note that ties into this, which is in the presentation of the budget section. There's an additional requirement that's related to this, which is to actually,
Can you cite it, like where?
Yeah.
I need them to scroll back.
Okay, go up to 802. 802.
Oh, and then, it's page 2, the procedures for public question and answer.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah, this,
805, I'm sorry.
yeah,
805.
805A4,
I was going to bring that up.
procedures for a public question period and for submission. Yeah, up in A, council shall publicize the general summary of the budget in one or more newspapers of general circulation in the municipality or in other widely available forms and manners as provided in the administrative code. And in that notice, it shall state, skip down to item 4, the procedures for a public question period and for submission of written questions by the public. So we're, assigning council the responsibility to define how people may ask questions, and we are then requiring council and the mayor, requiring the mayor to, or their designee, to prepare a summary of the responses to those questions.
The language is intended, as I see it, to do two things. One is to establish a public comment period that starts with the notice of the introduction of the budget and does not end until after the public hearings. It also then requires a summary to be created and published of the answers to those questions. So those were the two things I think that were identified at the previous commission meeting. The language is in two parts because of the way the charter is set up, so I wanted to make sure everybody understood that.
Thank you.
And I was really good with that because I wanted to know that people could ask questions about finances and get answers, so I was okay with the language.
I think if I remember correctly, Carl, this resembles something you've had a positive experience with at the state level.
I wouldn't call it positive.
Oh.
I'd just say it's an extremely common administrative procedure across all levels of government, so I think we're well within well-trod territory.
I'll make a motion to adopt the language as it's been proposed.
There's a second. Any other discussion on it? All in favor of the language as proposed, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Back to Mr. Cross, is there any, and Mr. Rediger, anything else on budget and finance?
Ethics.
And so we have ethics.
Mr. Feldman, do you have your,
I'm looking at Article,
with the article?
I'm looking at Article 12, Ethics Commission. I don't see the date for this is 7/16. I see Mr. Reddick is distributing copies.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, how do we
So you got
approach discussing this?
Okay, last week, or at the last meeting, we did have a presentation on, you were not here, on the basics of it. So I would actually ask between you and PEL how you want to present it, or
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just
refer to them.
Let me just ask, I understand Commissioners Byrd and Commissioner Dastra did talk about this last week and did a nice job summarizing. Was the draft provided to folks last week?
Yes.
I'm seeing yes.
Mhm.
If that's the case, I'm going to make a motion that we adopt the article in full.
Okay, there's a motion to adopt Article 12 on an Ethics Commission. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
There's a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, I do feel like I need to ask this question for the record. For our minutes, whatever. Because I've been challenged in my push for other things, like comments have been said, I'm looking for problems that don't exist, or I'm trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So like my genuine question, which I don't know that we've asked ourselves, is what problem are we trying to solve with the Ethics Commission? I support the idea of educating our elected officials and the public, but I feel like we need to be more clear about what we're trying to solve with this article.
Well,
And I think we kind of agreed what three things we did talk about. There are some questions and concerns that the article don't have enough teeth, that the Ethics Committee would again be appointed by the mayor and council. I was looking at, I guess, Pittsburgh's Ethics Committee, I think that was the one, and that, appointments came from recommendations. I'm not going to say appointments. Recommendations came from other people within the community. I think the Ethics Committee needs to be separate. I kind of like the language that we put in when we were thinking about redistricting commission on who those representatives could be. I kind of like that language. I was very concerned that there wasn't enough teeth in this, and that we were talking about maybe establishing this. Didn't we say a year? They have a year to come up with ethics. Yeah, a whole ethics code. They have a whole year, so this is just guidelines for them establishing. Yeah.
This is required.
So this requires them to come up with an ethic code. And one of the concerns was Scranton also had an ethic code, but they didn't do anything for years until something happened. So I know this will require us to have one, but I think it's still too much internal, I think, to address some of the issues that the ethic code should be. At least there should be a statement in here about that. This is really too broad. We're very, very broad. When I looked over Pittsburgh ethic code in some of the areas they address, this is really broad. But I'm glad that we are establishing one.
I just want to make a clarification, not a clarification, but there is, my understanding, a typo in 1202B where it says 1, 2 by city controller. That should be 2.
Should be two.
The written out TWO. So just so we're all clear, at the last line, it should say 2 by the city controller.
thank you. Yeah, so, Mr. McGurk.
Yeah, I like the idea of this. I think that, anything we can do to bring these kinds of things closer, making it more accessible by having it be a local body rather than, somebody having to take action at the state level, I think that's a good thing. So thanks for doing that.
So I wanted to speak to the product here, and we did meet with a number of ethics commissions around the state, and I do feel as though we've pulled items from those various commissions. The core of it is the responsibility to educate, investigate, and enforce. As a baseline, they have a responsibility to do that through the State Ethics Act, and it's true, the State Ethics Act exists, and it has an enforcement body in Harrisburg to which people can seek recourse. To be honest, I don't know the extent to which anyone has done that, or to the extent to which they have taken action here. I am of the impression that we have been very lucky to have a third-class city that's blessed with upstanding public representatives who have not done the public wrong and misdealings. And so I wish that to continue, and I think that this would accomplish that. In terms of how people become available to appoint to this body, it is true, it is broader than what Pittsburgh describes, but Pittsburgh literally lists a bunch of nonprofit organizations that get to name people. And I think in taking the spirit of their suggestion, 1202A indicates that people can be nominated to be picked for this commission to a public register of nominees, or of course nominate themselves. So there is quite a great deal of transparency on who would ultimately come through to this board. It could not simply be an, for lack of a better term, unannounced individual to serve on the board. There's a number of restrictions on who can serve there as well, prohibiting individuals involved in a political party office or a political action committee position for a full year prior to being placed on the commission. they do have the council does have the requirement to adopt a code of ethics that would either be at the standard of or beyond the State Ethics Act, but they have the responsibility to do that with the work of the appointed Ethics Commission. And I think that that is the mechanism that should be used to give people the confidence that what is ultimately adopted will serve people's best interests and not other interests. And also, I still believe that the council and the mayor should be responsible to approve those, because at the end of the day, they are the individuals that are elected by the voters. And as upstanding as we believe these appointees to this committee to be, they are not elected by the voters and lack, for that reason, democratic legitimacy. Finally, I'd just like to say there are some baseline items in here that are constituting, I guess you could say, the bare minimum of a code of ethics. Down in 1204, prohibited actions, public officials and employees. There's a number of descriptions of ways in which you cannot have unacceptable conflicts of interest. And I think that that accomplishes what people would expect from at least the most minimal ethics code, and is a good place to start.
And I wouldn't object, because I do believe that we do need this, article in the charter. What I would like to see changed, since now we have 9 council members, I would like to see 1 appointment by the mayor and 4 by council members. And I think we talked about this, Carl, and you might have put it in here, but we talked about what are we educating them? We had that discussion. I think maybe, Maxine, you might have gave us some a list
Yes.
of educational classes.
Oh.
Because we say we're going to educate the employees. What are we educating them about?
After our last meeting, we did define that under 1201, Ethics Commission shall be charged with education sufficient to provide information on compliance with and awareness of the Commission's functions. We gave that level of specificity. We also, after our last discussion, changed the size of the Ethics Commission from an initial planned 5 members to 7 members, increasing the number of appointments by the city council with the greatest number of appointments, and selected by the council as a whole. So I really feel like we have met the desired intent of what you were hoping for here.
I'm glad I didn't see the educational part, and I knew we talked about it, so I'm glad it's in there.
I was just going to say, I know I've talked to Carl about this before, and I think I just think that it's important to have this type of standard in our government. And it's kind of actually surprising to me that we haven't had this type of measure in place prior to this. It's not to say, I think that's great that you're thinking positive, that, maybe our government officials have been so, blameless or whatever, ethical, that nothing has happened up to this point, or maybe we don't know, or maybe there wasn't a mechanism for them to come and citizens to come and, this wasn't in place. And so I think it's important. I think this is a great idea for several reasons, but I think that just the simple fact that I think that this will be in place for people to have, and the education piece is really important. I know myself as a licensed social worker, I've said this when we had this conversation before, and a lot of other, other jobs require you to have, that when you're licensed, that they have these types of things in place. And I just think it just kind of levels us up, and I think it's a really good idea.
Thank you for humoring that question. Actually, I'm comfortable with most of the content of this. I do have one request to change wording, because I brought it up and now I have better words. Under 12.3, adoption of a code of ethics, where it says public workshop, I'd be interested in changing that to deliberative forum, because that's more concrete as a concept.
While I like the deliberative forums a lot, they cost money. And I would bet that the people in city staff are not trained to conduct those, and it would require hiring consultants to do that work. And it's my understanding from what the Center for Opinion Research has done, that those can cost anywhere from $20,000 to $35,000. So, well, I think they're great. I'm not sure we should mandate that in the charter.
My concern is that if we keep it as public workshop, that there's not as good of a concept of what that is, and I understand the cost. That was part of why I asked my question earlier, like, what problem is this solving? Because I do think this is a good standard for the city to have. But I think that we need to be very aware that setting this standard is going to cost money, and I would much rather ensure that the workshop that the public has to engage in is more constructive on their part than just checking a box. I am worried about the potential for this ethics commission to go awry, especially since it's a new thing for the city.
Call a question.
Question's been called. So motion to accept the Article 12 on the Ethics Commission, with the one change being in paragraph B of 1202 where it says two, follow TWO instead of one. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all. It appears we have a draft charter.
Yeah, I think so.
Moving on,
Well, transition, yeah.
from the committee of the whole, unless there is anything I've forgotten about deliberations. Mr. Cross, Mr. Reagan, Ms. Shedlock, that we have completed all the deliberations that we had planned. I just want to make sure.
We have to tie some things together now because of some discussions tonight, but yes,
Yes.
I think it's a draft charter.
Decide on the spelling of inalienable as compared to unalienable.
There are several articles that are still undergoing legal review. As they come back from the law office, we do make those changes because they're at the advice of the solicitor, but none of them are substantive to decisions of the commission.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the work that everybody has done for PEL and for all the members of the commission and the subcommittees. We did it, at least this step. So, one step. Okay. Moving on, subcommittee reports. The only, I guess, committee that's still active is the Public Engagement Committee. Is there anything you would
Yeah.
like?
I have notes, but I can't get my machine to work correctly, so hopefully I'll cover everything. We've had two information sessions. We have another one on the 6th. We are getting feedback. We are on Saka's radio station. It started to promote education on home rule. And John will be kicking off our interview conversations with them the 13th. And we expect those to be somewhat frequent, where we go and have a conversation on the Spanish language radio station. Saka is also arranging a small group session for John and I to go discuss the draft charter. I think that's happening next week sometime. I don't know.
Monday?
Lots of things got decided today. Monday, maybe?
Yeah.
In the Public Engagement Committee, so this is a decision for the commission as a whole. We discussed sending a mailer to voters, and the city said that it would cost $7,000. So we wanted there are two things. Should we send a mailer about home rule? It would be educational. It would not be telling anyone how to vote. It would ultimately be directing them back to a website, I would imagine, because you can't put everything on the postcard. But if we felt it was appropriate, the first decision is, do we think it's appropriate to send a postcard to all of our voters? And then the second decision then would be, when do we send the postcard? And I guess we can have this conversation next meeting. We don't have to decide today, but I just put it in your brains to think about.
Yes.
Is there any other option in getting that to all of the voters? And
In terms of,
any other way?
I didn't.
Email, like we talked about email,
Well, they have an email list, but it's not
Yeah.
everyone.
Right.
even,
The city has an email list, but it's not everyone, right?
I
registered voters, Office of Elections? Do they have, could they send some?
I mean, if you have some ideas,
I mean, I think,
email me.
I think if
and-
we want to be confident, that we have broadcast this to as many voters as possible, something in the mail is our most dependable solution. Just, again, from,
saying?
yeah, I mean, even, I'll make a comparison to, our business. I mean, we have an email newsletter and an email recipient list, and it's a tool, but, it doesn't,
Yeah, and this.
people ignore email, it gets deleted, and
It wouldn't preclude what we're already doing. by
Right.
Sending stuff
It
to
wouldn't
the
be in place
city
of, but if
email
we-
list, sending stuff to our home rule study list, putting stuff on social media, having our website, talking to the newspaper, all of those things, and would not preclude having education sessions in September and October. It's just an additional tool, but it's a tool that costs money. So that's why we felt as a committee that we needed to ask the commission as a whole, do you want to spend $7,000 to do something like that?
I agree that this
So
is
we can
something
talk about it
we can
next
discuss
week.
on the
Right.
15th.
Yeah.
Mr. Feldman,
I have a question
Yes.
related to what I think is public engagement, which is that we have a scheduled hearing, and
yes,
this is a question I think that might involve PEL and our solicitor. We have a scheduled public meeting, or a public hearing on the 8th. My understanding is that having a public hearing has specific standards that have to be met and specific ways in which it must be held, and I was hoping that PEL and the solicitor could expound upon how that has to function, so
okay,
that we could
if,
know.
if I can actually jump in, I was planning on bringing that up under other business, so I just, if that's appropriate, we'll just hold off for about
Sure.
4 or 5 minutes, and and then we can bring it under other business.
There is, I'm sure there were some things I'm missing, but I did type up a report. I will make sure that gets to you guys, and I will also ensure that it gets posted to E-code.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for public engagement? Would any other committees have anything to add, say?
Just since we have discussed the article now tonight, I mean, I think that there are some things we need to hear from the public on during the public hearings. I think I would encourage the public to just bring to any future engagements how they feel about items like term limits and forums.
Yeah, so let me make this clear. At our first in-person information session, we had large posters of the 4 articles that had the most changes. Budget and Finance, City Council, Budget and Finance, Ethics and Citizen Petition and Referendum, and then we also had a section for City Council. The section for City Council had a poster that was what was discussed in May, and then the variations proposed in the committee. We will leave those up for we will leave that engagement for the August 6th information session. So we continue to get feedback
Okay.
on that.
Any old business? Other business, the one item is the public hearing is scheduled for next Thursday, August 8th at 7 PM, not at 6:30. So change in the time, there's a scheduling with another meeting in City Hall chambers, or City Council chambers. It will be in here. We will be up at the front. If you could give a couple of minute just explanation of what this will be and how it will be run.
Certainly. So this public hearing has been advertised as a hearing. There will be a court reporter present to transcribe all testimony that's given at the hearing. The purpose of the public hearing is set forth by the Act, and in general interpretation is for the commission to hear testimony regarding the proposals that it now has in place or the actions that it's taken to date. So with that framework in mind, the proposed course for that hearing will be to ask your friends from Pell to provide you, as part of the hearing, the first draft of your final report, which is required under the Home Rule Act. At the conclusion of the report will be an introduction of the draft charter, which you've reached by consensus this evening. I would suspect that somebody from the commission or from Pell can give a summary of the charter provisions. And at that point, it would be opened up for individuals who wish to provide testimony to the commission regarding what's in the charter, what they'd like to see changed in the charter, what they think maybe wasn't included in the charter, and the same for the report. Did that answer your question?
About the public hearings, just the content? Yeah, okay.
So it's not a question and answer.
It is not a question and answer period. The time where you can take public comment, if you want question and answers, you've been doing that in large part through your engagement process. You have another meeting, I would note, scheduled for August 15th, at which, in theory, the schedule proposes for this commission to now consider taking a vote to place the question as set forth in the act on the referendum, which essentially means approving your final report and approving the draft of your charter. Obviously, as with every other public meeting, there are opportunities for public comment during that meeting as well.
I have a question. Is there a time limit for public comments?
With a public hearing, generally, there is no comment timeframe. What I would say is that the way most hearings are run is to limit redundant testimony. Otherwise, you could be here for 50 hours. So, if something is being said over and over again, it can be noted, I want to support what was already said, so that's on the record. But what the chair or whoever's running the meeting should be doing is trying to make sure that we are not getting 5 hours of the same sentence repeated, correct? But obviously, the public support and people wanting to give their support to a particular provision in the same concept should be noted of record as part of the hearing.
Written comments can be accepted?
Written comments can be accepted, but they need to be presented. One of the problems with written comments is who they're from. That'll be they can be part of the record, but the purpose of a public hearing is to accept testimony that's here from people that are here, not to accept written letters and comments from people that are not here. There have been methods for providing written comment throughout the engagement process that are separate from the hearing. The hearing requires a presence and to testify under oath or affirmation, so that you are putting what you say into the permanent records of this Home Rule Study Commission in the city of Lancaster.
Could we have the QR code to the feedback form for anyone who doesn't really want to speak, but they want to leave, that's just available?
That would not be part of the public hearing transcript, no.
Okay.
Because again, they're not present and they would not be taking the same formalities that everybody else is required to take in order to present their views at the public hearing.
Okay.
Keep in mind, it's in many ways, it's like appearing in court and saying, I want what I say to be under oath or affirmation and of record. And so that's different necessarily than the public comment section. And there's a little bit higher standard there.
Got it.
Any other business?
Wait, I do have a question, actually. So I understand not having written comments because of the process being sworn in, but will people be able to participate remotely in any capacity? Because I might be wrong, but you can swear people in as long as they're on camera, right?
We have not set this up for remote participation. This is a public hearing. We have not been doing remote participation throughout. So again, to do that would be a significant technology challenge. That is a matter of, I will tell you, it's a matter of opinion amongst many attorneys who don't view that public participation for a hearing is a fair process, because you can be being prompted by somebody else, be sitting in a room. There's challenges with that. This has not been scheduled as a public participation through remote means. You have provided, I will punt to Pell, but I would garner to say more opportunities for participation, more opportunities for submission of comment than any Home Rule Study Commission they've probably ever worked with, and I mean by far.
By far. Ever. Yeah, you should be proud of your public opinion.
Okay, any other business? Any other public comments?
John Gavea, 100 block of East Orange, and I had made a promise to myself that I would not comment at this meeting. But I want to take this time, as one who has attended about 8 or 10 of these meetings and spoken at most of them, to thank this commission, because I can attest to the hard work that went into this. As some of you may recall, I expressed concerns about whether this was going to be, could all be done in time, and the importance that it be done on time, because I wanted to see it on the November ballot and not next spring's. You've worked hard. I think you've got a good product here. I know there's some I's to dot, and T's to cross, or I's to cross and T's to dot, however that works. I want to say thank you very much as an individual member of the public who has come and said that you've worked hard, and I think you have produced an outstanding product. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gavea. Thank you very much. Any other public comments? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion
Oh.
adjourned. Wow, not everybody, oh, go for it.
Well, actually, sorry, go ahead.
Sure. So I just have a few questions. What incentive as a tax-paying resident?
Could you provide your name and the street on which you
Sorry,
live?
Dina Mayonis, 500 block of East Chestnut Street. What incentive as a tax-paying resident does Home Rule offer me?
Well, actually, public comments are public comments. They're not necessarily a question and answer period. You may ask any member of the commission outside of the meeting. Commissioners
Honestly,
may answer.
I would like to
but-
answer. So just talking generic and theoretical here, but let's say there is more flexibility around earned income tax. My understanding is that the city council is able to set a higher floor if possible, which could protect even more people who are making more than $12,000 a year. And because it detaxes us from the property tax system, it is a way to make sure that people who are on fixed and low incomes aren't the ones being hammered by tax increases. It's a lot of variables, but that's just one example of how it can be beneficial to certain taxpayers.
So a burden on some, not on others.
It shifts the dynamic of the burden, yes. In that specific example, it shifts the dynamic away from people who are on fixed or low incomes and towards people who are making more money, yes.
And I apologize for being late. I was at a previous meeting before this. I think 9 city council members were voted in for the Home Rule Charter. And was it quad-based or not quad-based?
All at large.
So the same problem is going to continue. Good to know. Lisa Cologne, 400 block of North Prince Street. I do have a few concerns about this, and I know this is not a question and answer session, so my first concern is that I found out that it was not either quad-based or at least majority-minority party. This will, in effect, continue to drive the problems that have been occurring. We have one party completely ruling the city government, and that is a lot of people that are not represented. Not everyone is a cookie cutter Democrat. And the fact that it wasn't even considered, that tells me that you guys want more of the same. Because if you, county commissioners, 2-1, yes, she gets overrode on a lot of votes. However, there's still dynamic. There's still someone there in city council who's listening to those other people that don't have the majority's thought process. I'm just really disappointed about that because it's bigger. You're supposed to be representing the residents. And when you talk about revenues and expenses, you have to remember that while some people's revenues may go up, they may not go up as much as other people's. And I understand the 6%. I do actually want more clarity on that. I was following along, and then when she started asking questions. So I am just, those are 2 things that I'm very concerned about. Because right now, all we're doing is instead of making a pool of 7, now we have a pool of a larger party dynamic in front of us. And that's my concerns. But if anybody can answer me the question about the 6%, I would like clarity on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
I'm actually just confused because I do appreciate wanting more clarity. When you say more clarity, just like why it was set at 6%?
No, are you talking about 0.06?
No, so
Because it's point, and how are you coming up with the total? That's what I was curious about. That's what started to get me. Because you want to
Gotcha.
you need to raise 6% of revenue in order to cover the holes. So then you're going to figure out how many people work, what the average was, and then divide that to try to figure out how much you need to raise each person's earned income tax. Then
No.
how do you come up with it?
so it's a sum total of all taxes raised, and I'm more than happy to try to figure
Yeah,
this out, but the finance.
I think this is something that would be better taken on one-on-one. Yes. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion. Second.
Also, please, point of order. If you're gonna have a public meeting, the door should be unlocked. I got into this meeting only because another member of the public went out, and this meeting is not on the city's calendar, and it's also not on the Home Rules website calendar.
Yes, it was.
It-
We have screenshots currently while I'm in the
Okay.
meeting.
It was, but it disappeared.
It disappeared
Well,
at 8:30.
Without objection, we are adjourned.
I texted Tony earlier today, it was not on the Home Rule Commission website.
Yeah, there was.
It is.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
No hydrated, Carl?
I didn't know the city website dropped the dates today. No. 'Cause I know